Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the Broccoli Fanfics. Back with amazing fanfiction. This is the series of What If 6 Eyes Deku Had Domain Expansion. Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Hello, memory or flashback. Hello, dialogue. Hello, thought. You can't play with us. We'll get in trouble if you get hurt since you don't have a quirk. But I want to play. You should start considering other options for your future. You need to be realistic, kid. Fine. I can do it. Are you going to defend that kid? You can't even defend yourself. You're weak, you're useless, you're just a Deku. Heroes never back down, even when they're at a disadvantage, Cat-chan. Izuku, you're covered in bruises again. This wasn't from playing, was it? Those kids, even Katsuki, how could they be so cruel to you? It doesn't matter. A hero doesn't give up so easily. I'm sure with enough effort I can. Oh my poor boy, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry you don't have a quirk. I'm so sorry. Fush. A green-haired boy jolted awake from a nightmare, a constant reminder of the harsh realities he faces every day since that fateful moment when he was labeled quirkless. Useless. This boy is Izuku Midoriya. At just 8 years old, he's already had to face the brutal truth of how unfair and cold the world can be, how your future is decided by the circumstances of your birth, no matter how big your dreams are. Izuku's perseverance and determination had always been remarkable, and his goals nothing short of noble. What drove him was his deep desire to become a hero, someone who could save everyone, someone as dependable as All Might. But over the years, the boy who was once full of energy and optimism had turned into a shadow of his former self, overlooked and dismissed by society. People branded him a dreamer, unrealistic from a young age, and slowly, the bright flame of his spirit was dimmed. Izuku got out of bed, lost in thought, as he often had been since his mother pulled him out of school and decided he would be homeschooled through online classes. You'll be safe here, my baby. No one will be able to hurt you here, his mother had said. But wasn't that just sad? Izuku couldn't tell what was worse, the constant bullying he had endured at school, or the way people treated him now, like he was made of glass, fragile and about to break at any moment. Either way, people no longer saw him as a normal person, they saw him as some kind of freak, defective, a Deku. No, none of that is the worst, Izuku thought, frowning. The worst part, in his mind, was that his own mother had given up on him and his dreams. The person he loved and trusted most had decided that he was a lost cause, constantly apologizing for him. He could see it in her tired eyes, the regret, the sadness for how things had turned out. But that wasn't what Izuku needed. The point of leaving school was to avoid those pitying looks. But if even his mother treated him that way, what was the point? Resigned, Izuku shuffled out of his room for breakfast. He'd grabbed some cereal since his mom was on the morning shift at the hospital and wasn't home. He'd take advantage of the time to watch hero videos on TV and work on his secret analysis of hero abilities and techniques in his notebooks. As expected from All Might, he prioritized evacuating the civilians while engaging the villain. By the time his monologue was over, there were no hostages left to harm. Izuku muttered to himself, smiling as he scribbled notes into his notebook labeled Hero Tactics #. I wonder if I could replicate some of those moves, at least on a smaller scale, he added with a shaky smile. He could feel the familiar sting in his eyes, signaling that tears were coming. No, I won't cry. I can't keep crying over every little thing. A hero has to be strong, even mentally, he told himself, trying to keep his emotions in check. But the sting didn't stop. In fact, it grew worse. It wasn't just irritation anymore. Damn it. Maybe I watched too many videos today, he muttered, rubbing his eyes. With a click, he turned off the TV and blinked rapidly as he got up. He should have been checking if he had any assignments or lessons pending from his online classes, but honestly, he just wasn't in the mood to do anything school-related. In fact, he didn't even want to look at any screens with how strange his eyes felt. I wish I could go to the park for a while, he sighed wistfully. But he knew his mom wouldn't let him out without supervision. He'd have to wait for her to get back from work. Still, The day looked so nice and there was nothing to do inside. What if I just go out for a little while? Just a quick lap or two. I'd be back long before Mom gets home, he thought, feeling unusually bold. Nervously biting his lip, Izuku, normally the obedient son, decided that his desire to go outside was stronger than his usual need to follow his mother's rules. He glanced back briefly before stepping out the door. Then, with a smile, he made his way outside. Izuku watched as a couple of kids his age ran around, laughing under the watchful eyes of their parents. Ouch! One of the boys cried out. Sweetie, what happened? Are you okay? His concerned mother asked as she hurried over. Relax, Mom, it's just a small scrape, the boy replied confidently. He's right, honey. Our little champ is tough. He'll be back to playing in no time, the father added with a grin. I know, our boy is so strong, the mother said, smiling. Izuku's face twisted as he watched the scene unfold. The boy hadn't done anything special, nothing to do with quirks, yet there his parents were, praising him and smiling. I could get up after scraping my knee too, Izuku muttered bitterly under his breath. Shaking his head, he tried to clear his thoughts. It wasn't worth ruining such a beautiful day with feelings like that. He even admitted to himself that he was more irritable than usual. If only I didn't have this demon pain in my eyes, he thought, his frustration growing. Now annoyed and tired, he stopped walking and rubbed his eyes. The pain wasn't going away, and now it was starting to give him a headache and uncomfortable throbbing, accompanied by a strange warmth. He blinked rapidly as he started walking again. Maybe going outside wasn't such a great idea, he grumbled. Watch out! Izuku looked up just in time to see a ball flying toward him. Instinctively, he ducked to the side, avoiding it. But something didn't make sense. The ball had seemed to dodge his head from behind. What? Izuku whispered. The pain in his eyes flared up again, sharper this time. Whoa, dude! How did you dodge a ball? Coming from behind. The boy who owned the ball asked, amazed. From behind? But I saw it coming from the front, Izuku thought, his eyes widening. He began stumbling backward, his head feeling strange, his breathing becoming shallow as he realized something. He could see everything around him, in every direction. Even though his eyes were looking straight ahead, he could clearly see what was happening behind him, to the sides, above and below. His brain was processing a full 360-degree scan of his surroundings. For an average human, the field of vision spans about 130 degrees clearly, with an additional 50 degrees of unclear peripheral vision. But at that moment, the young brain of Izuku Midoriya was handling a perfectly clear 360-degree view in both the horizontal and vertical planes. And the only thing he felt was panic. What the hell is happening? Izuku screamed in terror. Whoa, dude, are you okay? What's going on? The boy asked, concerned. Ignoring the boy, Izuku squeezed his eyes shut, but his breathing grew more frantic as he noticed something else. He could still see. Even though his eyes were shut tight, he could still see. How was that even possible? Nothing made sense. Where was his mom? He was scared. He needed to get home, right now. Izuku started moving, but the disorientation overwhelmed him. How could he know which way to go when his field of vision had expanded by 180 degrees in both directions? He didn't know which way was forward, backward, left, or right. Completely lost, he spun around in confusion, seeing a crowd of people staring at him with frightened expressions. Some of them were moving their lips, but no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't hear or understand what they were saying. Oh! He heard faintly, amidst the ringing in his ears. Izuku tried to concentrate with all his might. Oh! The muffled sounds slowly began to clear up. Kid, get out of the way! A crowd of people screamed. Yerf! Under the horrified eyes of the onlookers, a truck that couldn't brake in time slammed into the small figure of Izuku Midoriya. No, he came out of nowhere. I swear, I couldn't stop in time. The terrified truck driver yelled as he jumped out of his cab. Around them, parents cried and clutched their children, while the front of the truck, bent and smoking, obscured the view of the boy's condition. What's going on here? A woman dressed entirely in purple asked as she arrived on the scene. She was a hero who had come after hearing the commotion. A child was hit by the truck, an elderly man explained, his face full of anguish. The hero's eyes widened as she looked at the front of the truck. I swear. I tried to stop, but it all happened so fast. I didn't mean to kill him. The driver repeated, now on his knees, visibly shaken. The important thing now is to call an ambulance. Everyone, clear the area immediately. The hero ordered with authority. The crowd began to move back to obey, but just then, the cloud of smoke started to clear. Some curious onlookers peeked through the gaps, trying to see what had become of the green-haired boy. What they saw left them speechless, including the hero. There, crouching with his arms wrapped around his head, was Izuku. Floating mere inches away from him were fragments of the truck's front, suspended in midair as if forming a protective barrier. But the most astonishing part was that Izuku was completely unharmed, not a single scratch on him. Tears streamed down his tightly shut eyes as he trembled in fear. He's okay. He's alive. Make room, the hero said, rushing toward Izuku. She tried to touch the trembling boy, but her hand couldn't reach him. Something was stopping her at the same distance as the floating debris. Is this a barrier? But it stopped a truck? At his age, what kind of quirk does this boy have? The hero thought, amazed. Kid, listen to me. Everything's okay, nothing bad happened. You can turn off your quirk now, she said in a calm and gentle voice. Izuku seemed to react slightly, lifting his head toward her. Quirk. I don't have a quirk, was all Izuku managed to say, his nose running, before he collapsed unconscious. As soon as the boy hit the ground, the truck's debris fell neatly around him. Finally, the hero was able to approach and pick him up. The ambulance had arrived, and under the relieved eyes of the driver and the crowd, the small green-haired boy was rushed to the nearest hospital. Will he be okay, doctor? The nurse asked. Yes, of course. There's no physical damage, but scans of his brain show significant fatigue, likely from the use of his quirk. Have his parents been informed? The doctor responded. Yes, it took us a little while to get in touch with her, but his mother's contact information was on the label of his shirt. Smart. I'm sure the boy doesn't even know his clothes are tagged with that information. Mom. A weak, childlike voice called. Oh, you're finally awake, little one. Everything's okay. You're at Mizudafu Regional Hospital. Your mom is on her way. I'm Dr. Senju, the doctor replied with a smile. Hospital? Izuku asked, a bit more alert now. That's right. You had a small accident, but everything's fine. You weren't hurt, and no one else was either. You just gave the man driving the truck quite the scare, the doctor explained. The man driving the truck? Izuku echoed, confused. The doctor and the nurse exchanged quick glances. What's the last thing you remember, kiddo? The doctor asked gently. I remember that. Izuku trailed off, bringing his hands up to his eyes. Suddenly, the pristine white room around him, every corner and edge, materialized clearly in his mind. There wasn't a single spot he couldn't see. His head began to spin, and the monitor connected to him started beeping wildly. Easy now. Everything's fine. Breathe with me in and out, the doctor said, trying to calm him. Izuku tried to follow her instructions, and the frantic beeping slowed down, but the discomfort and confusion lingered. What's happening to me? Izuku asked, still keeping his eyes closed. We're going to figure that out. A nurse is bringing your medical records now. I think what's happening to you is related to your quirk. Could you tell me a bit about it? The doctor explained. My quirk? Izuku repeated, now even more bewildered. Before the doctor could answer, a woman with green hair burst into the room, wearing a uniform from another regional hospital. Izuku! She cried, rushing toward her son. My baby, what happened? Why did you leave the house alone? You know we had an agreement, she began to say rapidly, tears streaming down her cheeks. Izuku tried to answer his mother's barrage of questions, but once again his eyes began to feel strange. At least the pain was gone, but now there was a persistent sense of discomfort. He shut his eyes tightly. Mrs. Midoriya, your son is fine. I'll explain what we know about the incident, but first, can you tell me what his quirk is exactly? The doctor asked. His quirk? Izuku doesn't have a quirk. His mother responded, her voice tinged with sorrow. The doctor raised an eyebrow immediately as Izuku's mother looked back at him. What's wrong, my baby? Why are you covering your eyes? What's happening? Her question stopped abruptly when Izuku lowered his hands and opened his eyes. His mother had expected to see some irritation or damage in his small green irises, but what she saw left her speechless. Izuku's eyes were now a brilliant sapphire blue, glowing so brightly they seemed to emit light. What's wrong, Mom? Izuku asked, confused. Your eyes, Inko whispered, stunned. The doctor, who had been observing their interaction, started to piece things together. Just then, the nurse entered with a folder, and without wasting any time, Dr. Senju reviewed the information. It was just as she had suspected. Izuku Midoriya. Quirk, none, she read quietly. This is certainly interesting. Mrs. Midoriya, I can say with reasonable certainty that, despite being 4 years late, your son has finally awakened his quirk, the doctor explained, looking at the pair of shocked green-haired individuals. The discomfort and confusion were suddenly forgotten as Izuku's heart pounded in his chest. The small flame of hope inside him, which had slowly died over the years, suddenly reignited with fierce intensity. I have a quirk. Izuku trembled as he spoke. How is that possible? The doctor I took him to when he was 4 said the lack of a joint in his toe was clear evidence he didn't have a quirk. Inko exclaimed in disbelief. The joint-in-toe test is only a relatively new concept. Maybe in 3 generations, it will be a foolproof indicator, but in your son's generation, it's still just a test with a 75% accuracy rate in predicting quirks or the lack thereof, the doctor explained. Both Midoriyas were left speechless. So, what is his quirk? Inko asked, filled with uncertainty. That's what we're going to find out. Fortunately, my specialty is quirk research. To be honest, the fact that his power awakened so late suggests there's something unique about it. Izuku, I need you to be completely honest with me, okay? The doctor said seriously. Yes, I promise, Izuku responded. Good, let's start with what happened. The hero who brought you in said you were hit by a truck, but some kind of barrier stopped you from being hurt. Do you remember anything about that? The doctor asked. Inko went pale as she heard this, her hands trembling as she began frantically checking her son for any sign of injury. I don't really remember any of that. The only thing I recall is that my vision got weird, Izuku replied. The doctor began taking notes. All right, let's start there. What do you mean by weird? What happened? She asked, her interest piqued. When I left the house, my eyes started to hurt. It felt like a pain behind them. Now it's just uncomfortable, but I remember my head hurting and then I could see everything. I could see behind me, above, below, and to the sides all at once. That's why I got dizzy. I didn't know how to move. After that, everything became a blur, and when I woke up, I was here in the hospital, Izuku explained, trying to recall the details. So, you could see everything around you, the doctor looked up from her notebook. That would explain the headache and the discomfort in your eyes. The human brain isn't designed to process that much information at once. Also, if your quirk has only just awakened, it's likely your eyes underwent a sudden change. Judging by your mother's expression, I assume your eyes weren't always blue. She asked. Izuku was surprised to hear that his eyes had changed color. That's right. His eyes were like mine, Inko confirmed, still shocked. Now they're that color. Is this his quirk? She asked, puzzled. We're treading into uncharted territory. We could conclude that his quirk has something to do with his vision, but that wouldn't explain how he avoided getting hurt by the truck. In fact, the hero mentioned that the barrier surrounding him couldn't be surpassed, almost as if Izuku had become untouchable, the doctor said, deep in thought. Both Midoriyas listened intently. Mrs. Midoriya, what's your quirk? And what about your husband's? The doctor asked, curious. My husband's quirk is exhaling fire from his mouth, and mine is a very weak form of telekinesis. I can only pull small objects toward me, Inko said, embarrassed. Based on what you're describing, it's possible that Izuku's quirk falls into one of two categories. I have an idea, the doctor said with a smile after a moment of reflection. Mrs. Midoriya, I'd like you to use your quirk to pull this pen toward you. Izuku, watch carefully and tell me if you notice anything strange when your mother uses her power, the doctor suggested. Inko nodded and extended her hand toward the pen, using her weak telekinesis to slowly pull it toward her. Izuku, eyes wide open, carefully watched the process. Whoa! What is that? Izuku exclaimed in awe. Both his mother and the doctor looked at him curiously. Did you see something, Izuku? The doctor asked, intrigued. Yeah, some strange threads came out of Mom's hand. They were all messy and uncontrolled, but they sort of wrapped around the pen. Then, more threads came from the pen, and they connected back to Mom, like they were pulling it toward her. Izuku explained, fascinated. Inko looked confused, while the doctor smiled with excitement. Izuku, I know this might sound strange, but can you try to replicate what your mother just did? The doctor suggested. Izuku, filled with curiosity, nodded eagerly. He extended his hand toward the pen, and to his amazement, the same threads he had seen coming from his mother now appeared from his own hand. Instinctively, he tried to organize them. He could feel when they connected to the pen, and with all his concentration, he tugged on the threads with all his might. The pen shot into his hand, causing both his mother and the doctor to gasp in surprise. Excellent! That confirms it, the doctor said enthusiastically. What does this all mean? Inko asked, bewildered. Let me explain in simple terms. This is a very special case. When a child is born, their quirk typically falls into one of three main categories: mutated quirk, hybrid quirk, or inherited quirk, the doctor began explaining. Both Midoriyas nodded, listening intently. A mutated quirk happens when there's a genetic mutation, making the child's quirk completely different from their parents'. This type of quirk is the most unpredictable and can sometimes be dangerous to the child if their body isn't prepared for it. A hybrid quirk occurs when the quirks of both parents combine. For example, if Izuku had developed a hybrid quirk, he might have developed pyrokinesis, a mix between your telekinesis and your husband's fire-breathing ability. Finally, there's the inherited quirk, where the child inherits the quirk from one of their parents. This category has three variations. The quirk can be inherited identically, enhanced, or evolved. And this is where Izuku comes in. The doctor paused, glancing at Inko before continuing. Your power, Mrs. Midoriya, isn't just weak telekinesis as you've believed. It seems to be a very primitive control over a universal energy that you unconsciously draw toward yourself. Izuku didn't just inherit this ability, his quirk has evolved. He can not only control it better, but he can also see it, allowing him to manipulate it with much more precision. Both Midoriyas were stunned. Izuku was practically shaking with excitement. So, does that mean I can pull bigger things? Izuku asked with a huge smile. I suspect that's only the beginning. Your quirk has evolved significantly. You'll have to explore what else you can do with this energy that both you and your mother can manipulate. Your eyes seem to be the key to refining that control, the doctor responded. Izuku let out a small squeal of joy, the possibilities racing through his mind. But why did his quirk only awaken now? Inko asked, still in shock. That suggests that his quirk is extremely powerful. His body or DNA likely suppressed it until he met the minimum conditions to handle it. You mentioned your head hurt, Izuku. That was because of sensory overload from your advanced vision. If this power had awakened when you were 4, it could have caused serious brain damage, the doctor explained. Inko hugged her son tightly, tears streaming down her face. And clearly your power isn't just about pulling things. Somehow, you managed to evade the impact of a truck. You'll need to explore your potential carefully, the doctor added, rummaging through a drawer. It seems like your quirk is permanently active, which means you'll need something to help you rest your mind and eyes. Don't worry, I have several pairs of glasses here for people with eye-related quirks. Try them on and tell me if they make a difference, the doctor suggested, handing him a variety of glasses. After trying on several pairs, Izuku found a pair of round, black glasses that provided him with immediate relief. His mind relaxed, and his vision returned to something closer to normal. With these, I can't see behind me or above and below anymore, but I can still see to the sides, Izuku commented. A carbon-silicon alloy. Your field of vision has been reduced to 180 degrees. Can you still see the energy? The doctor asked. Izuku tried using his ability and noticed that while he could still perceive the energy, it was blurry now. I can see it, but it's not as clear, he replied. It seems that to use your quirk at its full potential, you'll need to remove the glasses. You'll have to train carefully to build up your brain's resistance and learn how to orient yourself with your full vision. With the glasses on, you'll still be able to use your power, but in a limited way, the doctor concluded. So what happens now, doctor? Inko asked, who had been silent for a while. We'll schedule monthly follow-ups to monitor your progress and see if we can improve the glasses. But for now, I want you to practice your quirk in moderation. Also, since your quirk has evolved, you'll need to think of a name for it and officially register it, the doctor said with a smile. Both Midoriyas nodded in agreement. The walk back to the apartment was quiet. Inko's expression was conflicted, while Izuku was practically buzzing with happiness, trying to see the energy even with his glasses on. Both Midoriyas entered their home, and the inevitable conversation began. Oh, Izuku, I'm so happy you've awakened your quirk, Inko said with relief. Yeah, Mom, it's amazing. I can't wait to see all the things I can do. I'm going to become the greatest hero, Izuku replied, smiling widely. You'll finally be able to make that dream come true. I'm so relieved. All these years of worry, and in the end, it was just because your quirk hadn't awakened yet, Inko said with a light laugh and a sigh. But Izuku suddenly stopped in his tracks. What do you mean? I always told you I'd be a hero, Izuku said quietly. Ignoring her son's words, Inko continued speaking out loud. Now you can finally go back to school. There'll be no more reasons for anyone to bully you. You'll be able to have a normal life again, she said. Behind the dark, round glasses, Izuku's eyes seemed to dim at his mother's words. Normal? So I was abnormal all along, he thought, feeling the weight of his worst fear creeping up on him. His mother had never truly believed in him. And now, this newfound faith she was showing wasn't in him. She didn't see him as her son, she saw his quirk. Nothing has changed. It's the same as before. Before, she saw my lack of a quirk. Now, she only sees that I have one, Izuku reflected, conflict rising within him. Oh, and just wait until I tell Mitsuki. She'll be so surprised and relieved. Maybe we can visit them, and Katsuki will get to see your new power. We could even enroll you in his school, and you two could be friends again. But Inko was cut off by Izuku's sharp, cold voice. No, Izuku said firmly. Inko blinked, confused. What do you mean, baby? Don't you want to go back to school? His mother asked, visibly taken aback. How can you say that? Weren't you the one who always talked about Bakugo with disdain? Izuku responded, his voice full of bitterness. Inko's eyes widened in surprise. But baby, it was all just a misunderstanding. He was just a child. I'm sure if you talk things out, he'll apolo. I will never talk to Katsuki Bakugo if I can help it. Izuku shouted, his emotions overflowing. Inko recoiled, shocked by her son's tone. Now that my quirk has awakened, do you think we can just pretend the last 4 years didn't happen? You were the one who took me out of school. You're the one who planted the idea in my head that I was weak, Izuku said with frustration, tears welling up in his eyes. Izuku, I didn't. What's the matter, mother? Am I suddenly worth something now? Am I finally able to be a hero? Izuku spat bitterly, releasing all the pent-up emotions he had been holding in for years. Emotions that had surfaced when his mother apologized instead of supporting him when he needed it most. Inko began to cry, trying to reach out to her son. Izuku, I didn't wait. Why are you calling me mother? Inko asked, her voice trembling. I don't need your support, mother. I survived 4 years without it. I can manage on my own, and you'll see. Everyone will see, Izuku said coldly. Memories from the past began to resurface in Izuku's mind. You can't play with us. We'd get in trouble if you got hurt because you don't have a quirk. But I want to play. You should consider other options for your future. You need to be realistic, kid. But I can do it. Are you planning to defend that kid? You can't do anything. You can't even defend yourself. You're weak, you're useless. You're a Deku. The memories surged with intensity, as if they had happened at that very moment. I'm not weak. I never was. Izuku said, tears in his eyes, staring at the ground. But now I'll show you. I'll show them. That not only am I not weak, I'll prove that I will be the strongest, Izuku said, looking directly at his mother before turning and heading to his room. Inko Midoriya, unable to move, with her heart in pieces, would remember that day for a long time as the day she lost her son, and for one reason only, her own fault. End of prologue. The sun began to rise over the horizon, casting the first morning rays over the city of Mizudafu. People were starting their daily routines, getting ready for work or school without a care. However, a specific percentage of the population, not only in the city but throughout the country, was gearing up for a particularly important day. We focus on an apartment complex in the same city. Inside one of the apartments, a teenager was tossing and turning beneath the covers. Beep beep beep. I'm up, mumbled the figure. A hand emerged from under the blankets, fumbling for the alarm clock on the nearby desk to silence it. The figure sat up, and with a strange flick of motion, the sheets seemed to slip off on their own. The teenager smiled faintly as he looked at his hand, which was making a slight gesture before heading to the bathroom. Izuku Midoriya, now almost 8 years after awakening his quirk, had gone through the typical growth spurts. Standing at 1.65 meters tall, his slim, almost lanky figure hid muscles that gave him agility. Other than that, not much about his appearance had changed except for two distinctive details: his eyes and his hair. Izuku spat after finishing brushing his teeth. In the mirror, his reflection stared back at him, bright blue eyes and completely white hair. Although it still kept its usual volume and messiness, the color had changed over time. The change in his hair wasn't sudden, like his eyes. During the first year after his quirk awakened, random white strands began to appear until, by his 12th medical checkup, the last trace of green that once defined him had completely disappeared. At first, the color change was a cause for concern. Dr. Senju suspected it was a side effect of the stress caused by his quirk, but after running several tests, they concluded it was a harmless genetic shift. For Izuku, the change wasn't a big deal. In fact, he felt like it symbolized the birth of a new version of himself. But for his mother, Inko, it was different. That small physical change made her feel like a part of what connected them had broken. And speaking of his mother, "I'll be back later," Izuku said from the door, adjusting his usual black glasses. Hurried footsteps echoed in the apartment. "Good luck." Inko Midoriya called, but she didn't get finish her sentence before Izuku closed the door. Her face took on a sad expression, one that had unfortunately become common for her over the years. On the other side of the door, Izuku hadn't left yet. He stood still, staring at the ground, sighing after hearing his mother's goodbye. The relationship between the Midoriyas had never been the same. Izuku had once felt furious and devastated by his mother's reaction when he awakened his quirk. Inko, on the other hand, felt incredibly guilty, realizing her son had been suffering for years without her noticing and that she had played a part in that suffering. Over time, their emotions cooled, but neither had the courage to reopen that conversation. The years passed, and their interactions became brief and awkward. Izuku still loved his mother as much as he did when he was a child, but deep down he couldn't help but feel disappointed, even betrayed. And being a teenager in the midst of PBR2I, he wasn't the best at managing his emotions. Enough, Izuku. You can deal with your family problems later. Now you have to focus. Like a hero. After all, today's the day, he thought, lifting his gaze and resuming his walk with determination toward his destination. Today, February 26th, was the day when everything would truly begin. Today was the entrance exam for UA High School. Izuku walked calmly through the streets of the city. He had already calculated how long it would take to reach the exam, so he wasn't in a rush. As he walked, his mind started to drift back over everything that had happened since his quirk had awakened. Izuku had dedicated all his effort to understanding his potential. He tried to manipulate the energy he could see with his enhanced vision, and although he made significant progress, he quickly realized that his power was incredibly difficult to control. It wasn't surprising that his mother could only attract small objects. Even that was impressive considering she couldn't actually see what she was doing. Controlling that energy required mastering countless variables to make anything work. Though he constantly practiced using his eyes without his glasses, it still caused him to tire quickly, so he couldn't fully rely on them yet. To compensate, he developed a method where he invented his movements or skills with his eyes exposed but practiced them with the glasses on, repeating the learned movements until he formed a kind of muscle memory, allowing him to control the energy without always having to use his vision. Complicated, right? Despite all his dedication, Izuku still felt a twinge of anxiety. His sharp mind had helped him develop useful techniques, but a part of him wondered if he had truly given it his all. However, there wasn't much he could do about it. After all, the law prohibited the use of quirks in public spaces, and his mother couldn't afford a training center. So, everything he practiced had to be done discreetly in forests or open areas of parks, limiting his ability to test his skills on a large scale. As a result, much of what he had learned remained mostly theoretical. "You've got to do your best, Midoriya. Give it everything you've got," he repeated in his mind like a mantra. His thoughts were interrupted by a sudden shout. "Watch out!" yelled a man who was on a ladder, painting the facade of a house. The reason for his shout was that a bucket of paint had fallen and was hurtling toward a mother and her daughter, who were walking by, unaware. Izuku reacted in an instant. He jumped with agility, and just before the paint reached them, the little girl managed to look up, seeing the massive amount of paint about to rain down on them. The girl screamed, closing her eyes as her mother instinctively shielded her. A few seconds passed, but the paint never touched them. The mother opened her eyes first, and what she saw left her stunned. The paint was splattered all over the ground, but around them was a perfect 2-meter circle that remained completely clean. Standing in the center of it was a young man with white hair. "What? How?" the mother stammered as the girl opened her eyes. "Don't worry, ma'am, everything's fine. I hope you don't mind that I used my quirk, but I thought it was better than a paint bath, don't you agree?" Izuku said with a smile. The mother stared at him for a moment, surprised, and then returned his smile gratefully. "It's no problem at all, I really appreciate you stepping in," the woman replied. "That was amazing," the girl exclaimed, looking at Izuku with wide eyes full of admiration. "It was nothing. Just make sure to keep it a secret. You know, it's illegal to use quirks without a hero license," Izuku said kindly. "With a quirk like that, are you planning to become a hero, kid?" asked the man who had come down from the ladder, visibly relieved that the mother and daughter hadn't been covered in paint. "That's the plan. But for now, I've got to go. I have my entrance exam today," Izuku replied as he waved energetically and resumed his walk, now at a slightly faster pace. "Good luck. And don't worry, I'll keep your secret," the little girl shouted excitedly, watching as Izuku walked away. Despite everything he'd been through, Izuku remained kind and considerate. He was still the same helpful and noble kid. Or well, almost the same. "I'm so nervous. I've trained so much for this moment." "Me too. What do you think the exam will be like?" "I heard the practical exam is the most important part. Don't underestimate the written part. Even though it doesn't affect your ranking, you still need to pass it to be considered." "I'll make it. Nothing's going to stop me. We'll be in the same class once we're admitted, I guarantee it." In front of the doors of the prestigious UA High School, those and many other conversations could be heard between the candidates. A crowd of young people from all over the country, not just Mizudafu, had gathered. Thanks to advancements in transportation, even those living in remote areas could reach the academy in no more than an hour and a half. Excitement, nerves, and a hint of arrogance reflected in the faces of many candidates dreaming of becoming heroes. Only 5 minutes remained before the doors would open, allowing the young hopefuls to enter the academy. Among the crowd was Izuku, who smiled slightly while discreetly observing the other teenagers. His fascination with quirks and heroic tactics hadn't changed over the years, so he was trying to deduce the powers of the other candidates. It was easy when they showed physical mutations, but those with no noticeable traits opened up a world of possibilities. Of course, if he took off his glasses, he could detect those with the emitter-type quirks, but that was a trick for later. Despite his confidence, Izuku felt a bit nervous. It had been years since he'd interacted significantly with people his age, and some of these young candidates would become his classmates. He said would become and not might become because, for him, failing the exam was not an option. He just hoped his future classmates would be better people than those he shared school with when he was younger. The last he'd heard about any of them was through the news, overhearing his mom talking with Mitsuki. I hope that villain gave that idiot Bakugo a good scare. It was probably his fault for being there in the first place, Izuku thought with a somewhat vengeful smile. All candidates, please enter the institution in an orderly manner. A few meters from the entrance, you will find automated staff who will scan your applicant identification card and direct you to the correct auditorium for the written test. Further instructions will be given by the exam proctor, announced a voice through the speakers. Excited cheers erupted as the academy's massive doors opened, and the numerous teenagers began to stream inside. Documents? Asked a robotic voice. Izuku showed his applicant card, and a large yellow lens scanned the paper. Applicant number 3126, name, Izuku Midoriya, Quirk, Limitless. Your auditorium is F, proceed to the right. Izuku smiled when he heard the name he had given his quirk. To him, Limitless represented the idea that there were no boundaries to what he could achieve with the right training and enough imagination. He continued walking until he reached Auditorium F. The room was enormous, just as he had imagined. He found an empty seat, and as instructed when he filed his paperwork, he found a bag with the necessary supplies for the exam, a pencil, an eraser, and a pen with the UA logo on the top. At least 30 minutes passed before the exam started, under the supervision of someone Izuku recognized instantly, Present Mike. After 2 full hours, the time limit for completing the written exam, Present Mike stepped to the front of the auditorium and used his quirk to speak at his signature loud volume. Izuku had finished the exam early and decided to rest his head on the desk to clear his mind. He knew that the less mental fatigue he had, the more effectively he could use his quirk. Welcome, aspirants. Are you ready for the show? Present Mike shouted. Nobody in the auditorium responded. Izuku lifted his head slightly to listen better. Tough crowd. Anyway, now I'll explain how the practical exam will work, he continued enthusiastically. Present Mike began detailing the exam. They would be sent to different zones simulating a city where they would have to defeat various types of robots. He explained that there were 3 types of robots, each worth a different number of points matching their number of presentation. The goal of the exam was to accumulate as many points as possible in just 10 minutes. So, it's a combat-focused test. That would put non-combat quirks at a disadvantage. But I guess that's not my problem, Izuku thought, concentrating. The only rule is that you can't attack other applicants. Any attempt will result in immediate disqualification. Aside from that, you're free to use your quirk to its fullest potential, Present Mike added with a grin. Suddenly, a teenager with blue hair and glasses raised his hand and spoke in a serious tone. Excuse me, why does the pamphlet mention 4 types of robots when you only described 3? A mistake like this is embarrassing for an institution like UA, which is supposed to train the best heroes. And you, with the white hair, he said, directing his attention to Izuku. Izuku fully raised his head and looked at him in surprise. Are you talking to me? He asked, tilting his head. Why were you sleeping? It's disrespectful to sleep at such an important moment. And why are you wearing sunglasses? Where is your school uniform? You're dishonoring your school by not wearing your uniform for the written part of the exam. If you're not going to take this seriously, you might as well leave now, the boy with blue hair said, visibly upset. Izuku's brow furrowed. What's this guy's problem? He thought irritably. First of all, I wasn't sleeping, I was resting my eyes to use my quirk at full capacity. That's why I wear these glasses. Secondly, Nowhere did it say that wearing a school uniform for the exam was mandatory, can't you read? And even if it were, I don't have a uniform because I was homeschooled. And third, why do you care what I do? It's none of your business, so why don't you just shut up and let them finish giving us the instructions? Izuku replied coldly. Wow, a short purple-haired girl with headphones whispered behind Izuku, trying to stifle a laugh. The boy with blue hair was completely stunned. He hadn't expected a response like that, but before he could reply, Present Mike intervened. You're allowed to wear whatever you want for both parts of the exam. And I was just about to explain the fourth type of robot. It doesn't give any points, it's more of an obstacle than a target. It will appear at a random moment during the test, explained the hero. I understand. I apologize for the interruption, the boy with blue hair said, bowing his head before quickly sitting down. Alright, if there are no more questions, follow me to Section F. We're heading to the site of the practical exam, Present Mike announced, leading the candidates out of the auditorium. This place is massive. It looks like an entire city. And there are 5 other zones like this? How much money does this academy have? The candidates marveled at the vast area where the practical exam would take place. Everyone had changed into athletic gear to improve their mobility. Izuku was the only one who hadn't changed, as he had already shown up wearing a blue hoodie, black athletic shorts, and matching sneakers. Focus, Izuku. This is the moment. My mind is clear and so are my eyes. I'll avoid taking off my glasses unless absolutely necessary to be able to use my quirk for as long as possible, he thought as he stretched and adjusted his glasses. The doors to the mock city burst open. Without hesitating for a second, Izuku dashed inside at full speed. The other candidates looked confused until Present Mic's voice boomed from a nearby tower. What are you waiting for? In the real world, there are no start signals. Go, 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 he shouted. Hearing that, the other candidates widened their eyes and rushed into the exam zone. Izuku had entered the simulated city with a considerable lead over the other applicants. His focus was on making the most of every second. As he rounded a corner, he heard the metallic clank of his first target approaching. Threat detected. Proceeding to eliminate, said a cold robotic voice as a combat machine advanced toward him. Izuku observed it calmly. The robot had a slim appearance, standing about 2 meters tall with multiple metal limbs equipped with rotating blades that sparked as they moved. The machine prepared to launch a massive attack, but Izuku was already ready. It's a one-point robot. Perfect to start with, he thought as his right hand moved into a special position. He crossed his index and middle fingers while curling the other 3, activating a technique he had perfected through years of practice. The robot's claw descended with great speed, aiming to crush Izuku. However, just before it made contact, something strange happened. Error. Target unreachable. The machine repeated as its mechanical arm froze in midair, just inches from the white-haired boy. Izuku smiled calmly, not moving from his spot. The robot was completely unable to reach him, its attempts to strike him rendered useless. Infinite, Izuku whispered with a confident grin. This, infinite, wasn't just any ordinary barrier. It was a technique Izuku had developed over years of refinement, replicating what he had done when that truck had nearly hit him. It consisted of creating a field of infinite deceleration around his body, an invisible barrier that manipulated the energy he could see with his eyes. This barrier caused anything trying to reach him to slow down until it almost completely stopped the closer it got. The robot, despite its strength and speed, simply couldn't touch him. It was trapped in a loop where every attempt to strike Izuku became futile. The infinite technique wasn't a simple defensive move. It required an immense amount of concentration. Izuku had learned that keeping the barrier active constantly drained a significant portion of his energy and mental capacity. However, by forming the specific hand sign he was using at that moment, he had managed to stabilize the energy flow, making the activation of infinite more efficient and freeing up much of his focus for other tasks. And now, he murmured, pulling his fist back slightly. With a swift motion, he moved his fist forward, releasing a powerful burst of kinetic energy. Punctress. The sound of metal being crushed echoed through the street as the robot's head disintegrated under the force of Izuku's punch. The remains of the robot scattered across the ground, and its metallic body collapsed heavily. Body reinforcement, he said to himself, smiling with satisfaction. This technique, called body reinforcement, was another skill he had honed over time. Instead of just surrounding his body with the energy he could see, Izuku had learned to concentrate it in specific areas, like his fists. By stabilizing the energy on one side of his body and leaving it unstable on the other, he could unleash massive force upon impact, multiplying the power of his strikes by at least 10 times, depending on the flow. It was a delicate balance, but very effective. I could try reinforcing my legs to run faster. But I don't have enough control yet. I can't risk losing mobility, he thought, casting one last glance at the destroyed robot. Determined to keep going, he turned down another street. This time, a larger robot lunged at him from the side, trying to take advantage of a potential blind spot. However, just as the robot was about to strike, it suddenly stopped dead in its tracks. Even with these glasses, I can clearly see in a 180-degree range. A surprise side attack won't work, Izuku said calmly, activating his infinite barrier once again. On the other side, a much larger robot was approaching. This one was a three-pointer, with a more durable structure and heavier weaponry. Unlike the others, its movements had a clear destructive intent. Perfect, Izuku murmured, extending his free hand toward the robot. Suddenly, the massive three-point robot began to lift off the ground. Izuku was using one of his most basic techniques, attraction, but on a much larger scale than when he first awakened his quirk. The robot flew rapidly toward him, accelerating at an impressive speed. However, just before it reached him, Izuku deactivated his infinite barrier and ducked, causing the three-point robot to violently collide with the previously stalled two-point robot. The impact was devastating, and both robots were completely destroyed. 5 more points. I'm up to 6 now, he told himself, continuing on his way at full speed. The attraction technique was simple in theory, but Izuku had reached an impressive level of mastery through constant training. By manipulating the invisible threads of energy he saw, Izuku could pull heavy objects with great precision and speed. Though he still didn't know the full extent of his power, he was already capable of attracting three-point robots without any noticeable effort. As he continued to move through the simulated city, he encountered 2 more robots, both worth 2 points. Without hesitation, he extended both hands, pulling them toward him at great speed. Timing it perfectly, he positioned himself right in the middle of them, and just as they passed by, he stretched his arms into a T shape, reinforcing his limbs. The 2 robots were brutally torn apart, destroyed by the power of his reinforcement technique. 10 points, he counted in his mind. With the same determination, Izuku kept moving through the exam area. Even though only 2 minutes had passed since the test began, he had already accumulated a respectable number of points. As he pressed forward, he destroyed 2 more one-point robots with reinforced punches, never stopping, always on the lookout for opportunities to score more points. As he kept running, Izuku noticed that other candidates, distracted and overwhelmed, were making costly mistakes. Although he wasn't obligated to help them, he couldn't stop himself when they were in danger. At one point, he saw a girl with black hair who wasn't paying attention and was about to be crushed by a three-point robot. Reacting quickly, Izuku extended his hand and pulled her toward him just in time, saving her from the danger. Be careful. Pay more attention to your surroundings, he said with a smile before launching himself at the robot and destroying it with 2 precise blows, one to the torso and one to the head. The girl, still in shock from what had just happened, didn't even have time to thank him, as Izuku was already on the move again, searching for his next target. The combination of attraction, reinforcement, and the use of his infinite technique was seamlessly integrated into his skill set, each ability applied with precise calculation. 35 points. 5 minutes left. I need to pick up the pace, he thought, diving into a narrow alleyway. To his surprise, the alley was a trap. 4 three-point robots surrounded him, and a 2-point robot blocked the only exit. All of the machines advanced at the same time, preparing for a coordinated attack. The sky above Izuku darkened as the metallic arms of the 5 robots descended on him, ready to crush him. In the observation room, several pro-heroes were closely monitoring the progress of the exam. "What do you think of this year's applicants?" asked a chimera-like hero, watching the screens with interest. "There are some strong candidates in this generation." "I think both classes will be quite impressive," replied a man. "That kid with the explosions already has 40 points. His mobility and reflexes are amazing," said a woman, pointing at one of the screens. "The pink-skinned girl, her acid is proving very effective against the robots," commented a slim, blonde man. "And you, Aizawa? What do you think?" the chimera asked, turning his attention to the hero known for his critical eye. "Camera 35, City F, get ready to stop the robots." "The white-haired kid just fell into an ambush," Aizawa responded in his usual bored tone. "Looks like he's in trouble." "This might cost him points," the woman remarked with concern. "Don't be so sure," the chimera replied, a curious glint in his eyes. The 5 robots unleashed their combined attack on Izuku, but something strange happened. On the observation monitors, error messages began to flash. Target unreachable. Target unreachable. The robots were completely stalled around Izuku, unable to touch him. All of their attacks stopped just centimeters from his body, as if an invisible force was repelling them. Izuku smiled calmly, his hand forming the familiar gesture. "What's going on? Why are the robots malfunctioning?" "Is this his quirk?" asked a silver-haired man in the observation room. Izuku, still surrounded by the robots, smiled with an unusual intensity. "This is the perfect setup," he whispered, a spark of excitement in his eyes. "They can't touch me, and my infinite barrier doesn't hurt them. But if I do this..." His hair began to move violently, as if caught in a sudden gust of wind. Suddenly, the invisible barrier he had created began to expand. The distance between him and the robots grew, pushing the machines back against the alley walls. "If I increase the energy flow in my infinite, the field expands. The energy drain is higher, but if the robots crash into something, they'll start compressing. Until they're destroyed," he murmured, smiling almost maniacally. The robots, trapped and unable to escape, were slowly crushed against the walls of the alley. Like being caught between 2 massive forces, the 5 robots were destroyed within seconds, their metallic bodies twisting and crumpling until they were nothing but wreckage. 14 more points, Izuku said to himself with satisfaction. He now had a total of 49 points. In the observation room, the heroes watched in astonishment. He crushed them? Telekinesis or some kind of barrier? What kind of quirk is this? Aizawa asked, a mix of confusion and interest in his voice. "His name is Izuku Midoriya. Quirk, limitless," the chimera hero replied, smiling. "Limitless? What kind of power is that?" the blonde man asked, intrigued. Meanwhile, on the battlefield, Izuku kept moving, looking for more robots. He was determined to keep racking up points, even though he was starting to feel the mental fatigue from keeping his quirk active for so long. The exhaustion was undeniable, but there was something else, a strange sense of euphoria that drove him to push beyond his limits. Feeling particularly bold, he reinforced his legs for the first time and made an impressive leap, soaring 10 meters into the air. "Yahoo!" he yelled, enjoying the sensation of flying. From the heights, he activated his quirk and pulled 3 robots toward him, 2 two-pointers and 1 three-pointer. The machines were lifted off the ground as if they were toys, speeding toward him with impressive velocity. Just before they reached him, Izuku deactivated the attraction and began to descend. However, the robots, propelled by the momentum of the attraction, continued their trajectory, violently colliding with each other just above him. Other candidates passing by the area looked on in shock at the chaos Izuku had unleashed from the sky. As he fell, the debris from the destroyed robots seemed to follow him, but Izuku, making his hand gesture once again, activated his infinite barrier. His fall slowed to a near halt, hovering just a few centimeters above the ground. The shattered remnants of the robots piled up above him, though in reality, they never touched him as his barrier kept them at bay. With one last surge of energy, he expanded the barrier, clearing the heap of metal from his path. 7 more points. That puts me at 56 inch, he calculated mentally, breathing heavily but with a euphoric smile on his face. Present Mick's voice echoed across the exam field. Only 3 minutes left. Izuku, aware of his growing mental fatigue, felt that he could still keep going. His mind was tired, but the excitement pushed him to go further. I can keep going. I can push even further, he thought with a mix of determination and adrenaline as he hurled himself back into action. Izuku extended his right hand, focusing, and his eyes gleamed intensely behind his dark glasses as 3 one-point robots aligned in front of him. Energy flowed through his body, invisible to everyone else, but to him, it was palpable. With controlled precision, the metallic robots were pulled toward him in a perfectly straight line. The force guiding them seemed to tug at every bolt and screw, drawing them inevitably closer to Izuku. As the robots sped toward him, Izuku took a deep breath, calculating the precise moment. With a simple flick of his free hand, energy surged through his body, reinforcing his right arm. His dark glasses slid slightly down his face, slick with sweat, but that didn't stop him. Boom! The impact was immense. His reinforced fist smashed through all 3 robots in a single blow as if they were made of paper. The metal bodies of the robots shattered, sending sparks and debris skidding across the ground, rolling to a stop, lifeless like discarded toys. Izuku didn't even pause to look at the destruction. Suddenly, he sensed a threatening presence behind him. A 3-point robot was approaching, ready to strike him from behind. Without turning, Izuku reacted instantly, connecting with his surroundings. His eyes caught sight of a large chunk of rubble in front of him, part of a collapsed building. He activated his attraction quirk once again. With a fluid motion, the rubble lifted off the ground, floating with invisible power. The piece of debris shot backward with incredible speed, like a projectile. He ducked just at the right moment, letting the rubble fly past him, feeling the rush of air as it whizzed by. The rubble hurtled straight into the 3-point robot, which had no chance to react. The impact was brutal. The weight of the debris crushed the 3-pointer, causing it to collapse under its own mass. The remnants of the robot scattered across the ground, and the street was silent for a brief moment. Izuku couldn't help but let out a wild laugh, adrenaline pumping through his veins. Ha 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 ha. His voice echoing through the simulated city, fueled by the thrill of the battle. Suddenly, a deafening sound cut through the air. Izuku's laughter stopped abruptly. Something enormous was shaking the ground beneath his feet. He quickly turned his head to the right and saw it, the massive 0-point robot. But this wasn't just big, it was colossal. Izuku's eyes widened in shock as he took in the monstrous size of the machine. The giant metal behemoth advanced with steps that seemed to make the entire simulated city tremble. Its shadow darkened the streets, and the buildings around it vibrated from its sheer presence. Each step it took sent a quake through the ground, as if an invisible earthquake was tearing through the area. What the? Izuku muttered, his words drowned out by the mechanical roar of the beast. The screams of other applicants began to fill the air, mixing with the rumble of the robot. Run! It's the 0-pointer. What is UA thinking? Look at the size of that thing. Panic spread like wildfire among the examinees as they started running in all directions, fleeing from the towering robot. Izuku felt the impulse to run with them, knowing that fighting something so massive was madness. His mental fatigue was catching up with him, his brain screaming for rest. But just as he was about to step back, he heard something that made him freeze in place. Help! A female voice cried out from the distance. Izuku quickly scanned the area, searching for the source of the scream. At the end of the street, a girl with brown hair was trapped under a huge piece of debris. Her face was filled with desperation as she tried, in vain, to free her leg, which was completely pinned down. I can't move, she shouted, her voice cracking as she struggled to hold back tears. A little farther away from the robot, another examinee was trapped between the claws of a 2-point robot. Though damaged, the robot refused to let go. Damn it! Why can't I break free? He yelled, frantically fighting against the robot's grip. Someone help! This girl passed out. cried a third candidate, holding an unconscious girl in his arms. Izuku looked around, seeing how the other applicants continued running, ignoring the desperate pleas for help. No one stopped. No one looked back. They were all blinded by the fear of the massive zero-pointer. Izuku's mind started racing in 1,000 directions. 3 people were in danger. The giant robot was closing in. And he was alone. No. I can't save all of them, he thought, a wave of helplessness washing over him. The mental exhaustion hit him like a tidal wave. He couldn't think clearly. He couldn't pull all 3 of them to safety without risking injury. His control wasn't precise enough to handle something that delicate in his current state. He would have to choose. Save one, and leave the others behind. His breathing quickened. The cries of the examinees echoed in his mind like endless reverberations. His body began to tremble from the tension and stress. A nervous smile spread across his face. Save just one? What the hell is wrong with me? He thought as a spark of determination ignited inside him. No. I can't do that. I'm going to save all of them. With that resolution set in his mind, the fear vanished. Izuku charged toward the massive zero-point robot, knowing there wasn't a second to waste. His legs burned from the effort, and every step felt heavier than the last, but he couldn't stop. He had one final technique in mind. It was something he had theorized but never had the chance to test. Now it was his only option. I've never tried this before. But if it works, I'll stop the robot, he thought, his determination unwavering. As he sprinted toward the girl trapped under the rubble, Izuku removed his dark glasses. His eyes, now fully exposed, glowed with an intense blue light. The energy within him began to swirl, responding to the call of his will. With his glasses off, the flow of energy became clearer, more precise. The threads of energy that only he could see started vibrating and intertwining around him. I can see all of them. They're outside the robot's range if I bring it down with the exception of the brown-haired girl, he thought, racing forward. His unobstructed vision allowed him to see everything around him, capturing every detail of the battlefield. Izuku extended his right arm, while his left hand gripped it tightly to stabilize the flow of energy that was rapidly building up. The theoretical idea behind what he was about to do was to combine infinite with his attraction force and his manipulation of volatile energy. He had never attempted it before, but now he had no choice. If I create a focus of energy similar to infinite, but make it mobile, I can launch it. I'll push the attraction to its maximum and have it collide with the volatile energy. It'll warp space and compress everything in its path, he murmured, concentrating as a small point of energy began to form in his outstretched palm. His bright blue eyes, glowing with a superhuman intensity, tracked the threads of energy, stabilizing each one. The energy swirled in his hand, spinning faster, gathering into a bright point that grew larger with every second. Focus, Izuku. See the flow. Stabilize the threads, accelerate the rotation. Push it to the limit, he thought as the tiny point in his palm turned into a luminous sphere, growing in size with each passing moment. The sphere started to glow, no longer invisible but now radiating an unusual color he had never seen before in his energy. I never thought it would take on this color. But now it's time to see if it does what I think, he said with a tense smile as he positioned himself between the girl with brown hair and the massive robot, shielding her with his body. Blood began to drip from his nose from the strain, but Izuku didn't stop. The zero-pointer was about to attack. With strange calmness, Izuku raised the sphere of energy above his head and hurled it with all his strength at the robot. Improvised technique, infinite energy rotation. Blue. The sphere shot forward in a straight line, heading directly for the massive torso of the zero-point robot. The sphere collided, and what followed was pure destruction. The giant robot began to fold in on itself, twisting and contorting as the sphere seemed to warp the space around its metal structure. The metal shrieked horribly, being compressed into unnatural shapes. The sound was deafening, like the agonized scream of the machine itself. Izuku, still standing with his arm outstretched, continued to pour energy into his attack. The top half of the robot was obliterated, crushed into a superheated mass of metal that started collapsing toward the ground, dangerously close to Izuku and the girl. With the last of his energy, Izuku made his hand gesture and activated his infinite barrier at full power, creating a shield around them just in time. The compressed metal stopped mere centimeters from his barrier, saving them from being crushed. The air was silent for a brief moment. The exam is over. Present Mick's voice echoed across the exam field. The other candidates, who had been running in fear, began to approach, shocked at what had just happened. Some rushed to help the others who had called for aid, but everyone was in awe of what they had witnessed. As the dust settled, it revealed Izuku standing, blood dripping from his nose and his blue hoodie stained with red. His legs trembled, but a tired smile crept across his face. He looked at the girl he had just saved. "Are you all right?" he asked with a weak smile, breathing heavily. The girl, still in shock, could barely find her voice. "Me? You're the one who's bleeding. Are you okay?" she asked, concerned. Izuku let out a soft chuckle, shaking his head slightly. "I'm just glad you're all right. Everyone's safe," he murmured before his body, finally exhausted, gave in. He collapsed, unconscious, into the girl's arms, who managed to catch him just in time. In the observation room, the pro-heroes who had been monitoring the exam were left speechless. "What the hell was that blue sphere?" asked the blonde man, unable to take his eyes off the screen. "I don't know. But did you see how he took down the zero-pointer?" remarked the silver-haired man, equally amazed. "It looks like he hurt himself with that attack." "Maybe a last-ditch effort?" a woman commented, a mix of curiosity and concern in her voice. The Chimera hero smiled as he observed the monitors. "I've already sent Recovery Girl to that zone." "Got anything to say, Aizawa?" he asked with a smug grin. Aizawa watched the screen in silence for a long moment before letting out a sigh. "Trouble. That kid's going to give me a lot of trouble," he said in a resigned tone, though a barely perceptible smile crossed his face. A few days later, Izuku sat at his desk, staring blankly at the wall. It had been exactly a week since he'd taken the entrance exam for UA High School, and every day since had been an emotional roller coaster. Outwardly, his face showed a neutral, almost cold calmness, as if the suspense didn't bother him. But inside, he was being consumed by nerves, as if a whirlwind of anxiety was constantly keeping him on edge. The technique he had used at the end of the exam, combining infinite with his attraction force, had obliterated the massive zero-pointer in a way that no one had expected. After his quick recovery thanks to Recovery Girl's quirk, Izuku hadn't been able to stop worrying if he had broken any rules. Technically, Present Mike had only recommended avoiding the zero-pointer, but he hadn't said it was forbidden to destroy it. Still, that didn't bring him much comfort. Izuku knew that getting into UA was his only realistic ticket to becoming a hero. The academy not only offered access to experienced teachers and professional heroes but also provided the best hero suits from top companies, state-of-the-art laboratories, and most importantly, facilities where he could train his quirk at its fullest capacity. There, he could train without limits, under the supervision of professionals who would guide and mentor him. He had to get in. Failure wasn't an option. The hours dragged on endlessly. His fingers drummed on the desk, his legs shook nervously under the table, and his mind kept replaying every moment of the exam over and over again. Knock, knock, knock. The knocks on the door snapped him out of his trance. His heart skipped a beat. Izuku stood up slowly, his expression still composed, and opened the door to his room. Standing there was his mother, Inko Midoriya, trembling with her eyes full of uncertainty. Izuku, it's here. The letter is here, she said in a shaky voice, holding out a white envelope. Her hands were shaking so much that she could barely hold it. Izuku looked at her, trying to keep his face calm. He took the envelope without saying a word and closed the door behind him. He stood there in silence for a moment, staring at the envelope in his hands. His eyes locked onto it, as if it were an object of immense power. Everything he had ever dreamed of since he was a child depended on this single piece of paper. His future, his goals, his dreams. Everything was inside that envelope. Taking a deep breath, he carefully opened it, almost afraid of what he would find inside. The first thing he saw was a letter, but what really caught his attention was a small electronic device that gently fell onto his desk. As soon as he touched it, the device lit up and projected a hologram that illuminated the room. Izuku's eyes widened in disbelief. It was All Might. "What?" he whispered, unable to believe what he was seeing. All Might's holographic figure appeared, wearing his signature wide grin full of energy. "I am here," All Might exclaimed in his booming voice, making his usual grand entrance. Izuku stood frozen, his eyes locked on the image of the greatest hero of all time. Why was All Might talking to him? What could this possibly mean? "Young Midoriya, let me inform you that you aced the written exam with an almost perfect score of 97 points. Impressive." All Might continued, his vibrant tone filling the room, "and in the practical exam, your score was 68 points. Izuku's body tensed. He immediately stood up, his heart pounding in his chest. Did he make it? Did he score enough points to get in? But that's not all. All Might said, interrupting his thoughts, the exams are not just about physical and written tests. A team of professional heroes monitors every moment, ready to step in if things get out of control. At no point were you in any real danger. Hearing those words, Izuku felt a pang in his chest. For a moment he felt a bit foolish. Of course, there was never any real danger. How had he not thought of that? The exams were designed to be safe. You're probably thinking you didn't need to face that zero-pointer, right? All Might continued with a smile, but you're wrong, young Midoriya. Besides evaluating combat skills, we also assess heroic acts. A hero academy could never overlook the importance of saving others. And that's why there are rescue points. Izuku's breath quickened again. Rescue points? Young Midoriya, you didn't face that colossus to save yourself or to show off. You threw yourself into danger to save your fellow applicants. During the exam, you helped others on more than one occasion, demonstrating the true spirit of a hero. And for that you are awarded 78 rescue points. Izuku Midoriya, your total score is 146 points. You got passed. All Might finished his statement, striking an exaggerated pose and flexing his muscles. Izuku could hardly believe what he was hearing. 146 points. A mix of emotions hit him all at once. Relief, euphoria, the exhaustion of days of anxiety, all of it released in a rush. Tears welled up in his eyes and streamed down his cheeks. The emotions he had held back for so long finally overflowed, making his body shake. Come to your academy, young man. Let's make you a great hero. All Might concluded with his signature confident smile just before the projection faded. Izuku stood frozen in the middle of his room, tears still flowing freely down his face. He didn't try to stop them. He cried hard, but it wasn't from sadness. They were tears of joy, of relief. He had finally done it. He had finally crossed the starting line. He was one step closer to achieving his dream. He was going to be a hero. On the other side of the door, Inko Midoriya had been listening to everything. Her hands covered her mouth, trying to stifle her own sobs as tears streamed from her eyes. Her heart pounded as she heard the news she had so desperately hoped for. "Oh, my baby, you did it," she whispered through her tears, her voice trembling. With her heart swelling with pride but still hurt by the distance between her and her son, Inko quietly withdrew to her room, leaving Izuku alone to savor the moment, a moment that would change his life forever. End of Chapter 2. Train arriving at the station, please disembark in an orderly and cautious manner to avoid accidents, said a voice over the train speakers, pulling Izuku out of his thoughts. Izuku adjusted his tie again, trying to make it look better than it did, a task that seemed harder than he remembered. I guess I'm just not used to wearing a uniform after so long, he thought to himself. And he was right. For the first time in a long while, Izuku would attend school alongside peers his age. He would share classes with other aspiring heroes who, like him, had the same ambition and drive. Though he wouldn't admit it openly, there were moments when he thought his refusal to return to in-person school for years had been more of a tantrum than a well-reasoned decision. Now, he feared that choice might make it harder for him to readjust to a school environment. Still, those years at home had also helped him rebuild the confidence he had lost after suffering ostracism during such a crucial stage of his childhood. Speaking of ties, 3 days after receiving his UA acceptance letter, he had received a package containing the curriculum, along with 3 complete sets of the school's formal uniform, tailored to his exact measurements. This struck him as odd since he didn't remember providing that information to the academy. Another question for later, he thought, setting the doubt aside. He was also surprised by the level of detail in the institutional email, information one would typically expect a homeroom teacher to share on the first day of school. Shaking his head to clear these thoughts, Izuku stepped off the train and started walking, holding a small piece of paper in his hand. "Good luck, my future hero. I love you," read the message, written in his mother's warm handwriting, a little note she had left on the dining table next to a hot breakfast. Izuku sighed wearily, clutching the paper tighter. "You at this class? Where's class 1A?" Izuku muttered as he wandered through the academy's seemingly endless hallways. His first impression of the campus was how imposing it felt. During the entrance exam, he had only seen one of the mock cities and the auditorium where the written test had been conducted, but the main building itself was enormous. As he walked through the corridors, he passed a section marked Support Workshop. Peeking briefly inside, he saw an area that looked more like an industrial rocket testing site than a simple workshop, with massive, expensive-looking tools and equipment very expensive. Once again, Izuku appreciated the fact that UA didn't just have a hero department, it also offered general studies, support, and business tracks. That diversity made it one of the most comprehensive high schools, training all kinds of professionals, not just heroes. Finally, here it is. Whoa, what a huge door, he murmured to himself as he arrived at the classroom's entrance. The door was considerably tall, towering over his 165 centimeters frame. Feeling a mix of anticipation and nerves, Izuku pushed it open and stepped into the classroom. What greeted him was an immaculate room with 20 desks perfectly aligned and 2 electronic whiteboards at the front. Large windows let in plenty of natural light, enough to illuminate the space without being overwhelming. However, there was one detail: the classroom was completely empty. Checking his phone, he realized he had arrived at least 20 minutes before the official start of classes. Chuckling softly and wondering whether seats would be assigned, he decided to take one near the windows, in the middle section of the room. Placing his backpack under the desk, he pulled out his latest notebook, titled UA Training No. 1, where he planned to take detailed notes on hero classes, analyze his classmates and teachers, and keep a meticulous record of his own progress. While waiting, he decided to jot down thoughts about his latest technique. Improvised technique, infinite energy rotation blue, he murmured softly. By applying the principle of infinity to contain volatile energy and give it rotation along with an attraction axis, a glowing blue orb is created. This orb has attraction capabilities far superior to anything I've achieved so far. The technique, however, left me exhausted, and I had to remove my glasses just to barely stabilize the energy flow. The following notes were heavily underlined. Extremely difficult to execute. That was the first thing he had written. I need to practice it as soon as possible. Whether it can be done with my glasses on remains a mystery, as I simply increased the amount of raw energy without controlling it properly. The result was a semi-controlled attack that caused massive damage. Izuku frowned as he reviewed his notes. The technique was powerful, but the collateral damage worried him. He continued writing. If I reduce the energy output, could the damage be minimized? If so, this technique could potentially be used as a method of capturing or subduing multiple opponents, eliminating excessive damage and leaving them only temporarily incapacitated. In theory, this would also reduce the stress it places on my brain. Further down, another thought was written in all caps. Is the core truly mobile? Izuku paused for a moment, reflecting. Initially, I thought this attack could move, but I couldn't confirm it. If it could, its applications would increase significantly. Otherwise, it would only work as a sort of static mine or pseudo-black hole. He closed the notebook briefly and leaned back in his chair. He knew he needed more training to master the technique, improve his timing with his quirk, and optimize his physical abilities, particularly agility. There was also a lingering question he had pondered since childhood but had never been able to test. If I can control energy to attract, would it be possible to manipulate it to repel? He thought, deep in concentration. Izuku was abruptly pulled from his thoughts by the sound of the classroom door opening. Looking up, he immediately recognized the boy who entered, the blue-haired, glasses-wearing student who had confronted him just before the practical exam during the entrance test. The newcomer froze, surprised to see him already in the room, then walked toward him with determined steps. Izuku braced himself mentally for another confrontation. "I deeply apologize for my presumptions during the exam," said the young man with an exaggerated bow. "It was not right of me to assume you weren't doing your best. I hope we can start over." Izuku's eyes widened, visibly surprised by the gesture, and his body immediately relaxed. He hadn't expected such a direct and formal apology. "Don't worry, it really wasn't that big of a deal," Izuku said with a slight, nervous smile. "I appreciate your apology, but please, lift your head," he added, concerned about what others might think if they arrived and saw the blue-haired boy bowing to him. "Nevertheless, I sincerely apologize," the young man insisted, straightening up. "Also, it's clear you figured out the true purpose of the exam. Oh, how rude of me not to introduce myself sooner. My name is Tenya Iida," he added, moving his arms with an almost robotic precision. "Pleasure to meet you, Iida. I'm Izuku Midoriya." "Are you referring to the rescue points? Because if that's the case, to be honest, I had no idea. I just reacted when I saw others in danger. It was impulsive, maybe even a little stupid," Izuku said with a nervous laugh, scratching the back of his neck. "That makes it even more admirable," Iida replied earnestly. "Your final attack was truly impressive." Before he could continue, another voice joined the conversation. "Attack? What attack?" asked a girl with pink skin and small horns, her bubbly, cheerful tone catching both of their attention. "You're not talking about that attack, are you?" A blond boy with a black lightning bolt in his hair interjected, grinning curiously. "The attack that completely destroyed a 0-point robot? I heard it was just a rumor," added a red-haired boy with spiky hair. "It wasn't a rumor," said a young woman with purple hair and jack-like ears, smiling playfully. "The cocky white-haired guy here completely pulverized it. I saw it with my own eyes." "Cocky?" Izuku thought in astonishment. But as he looked at the girl, he realized she was joking. After all, he recognized her as the girl who had laughed during his exchange with Iida before the exam. And, being honest, he had been a bit cocky in his response to the blue-haired boy. "Really?" the pink-skinned girl exclaimed, her eyes shining with excitement. "I heard that rumor too, but I didn't think it was true." Little by little, more and more students began arriving in the classroom. While not all of them gathered around Izuku, the conversation about the entrance exam started spreading, creating a sense of camaraderie in the room. The classmates who had joined the initial discussion introduced themselves as Mina Ishido, Denki Kaminari, Eijiro Kirishima, and Kyoka Jiro, respectively. Internally, Izuku felt grateful that, with the arrival of more classmates, the topic of his destruction of the 0-point robot began to fade. For the first time in a long while, he found himself chatting comfortably with others his age. The conversation flowed naturally between him, Jiro, and a tall young man named Mizo Shoji, when another voice resonated through the room. "Move it extra!" a rude voice exclaimed. Izuku shifted his gaze slightly toward the source of the voice, and under his dark glasses, his brow visibly furrowed. "You've got to be kidding me," he thought in annoyance. "How did this idiot get admitted?" Katsuki Bakugo, with his ash-blonde hair and red eyes, strode arrogantly through the classroom, acting as if he owned the place. His superior, overbearing attitude was unmistakable as he made his way to one of the front desks. "Looks like we've got the first JRK of the class, huh?" Jiro muttered in a tone low enough for only Shoji and Izuku to hear. "I figured there'd be at least one." Shoji nodded silently, his gaze fixed on Bakugo, while Izuku couldn't help but smile inwardly. His last interactions with the Explosion user years ago had been extremely bitter, and to make matters worse, it always seemed like everyone around Bakugo adored him, as if he could do no wrong. At least this time, his new classmates seemed to have quickly picked up on the kind of person he was. "I know that look, Midoriya. Do you know him?" Jiro asked, raising an eyebrow. "I wish I didn't, believe me," Izuku replied bitterly, his frown deepening. At that moment, the classroom door opened again, and two girls entered, chatting animatedly. Izuku instantly recognized one of them, the brunette he had helped during the exam. The other, however, was unfamiliar to him. She had blonde hair, blue eyes framed by glasses, and a distinctive air about her, likely a foreigner. The brunette seemed to pause her conversation with the blonde to scan the room. Her gaze briefly landed on Izuku, and she smiled, appearing ready to approach him when another voice, seemingly tired and serious, interrupted the room. "If you're here to make friends, you'd better go somewhere else." Everyone in the classroom seemed to freeze, except for the two girls at the entrance, who turned to look at the floor in confusion. "This is..." Slurping sound was heard, the hero department. A somewhat disheveled man with tired eyes rose from a yellow sleeping bag, sipping from a juice pouch. "It took you more than 8 seconds to settle down. Completely illogical." "What? Who?" the blonde girl with glasses asked. "I'm Shota Aizawa. I'll be your homeroom teacher, though I think tutor is a more fitting term. I'll personally oversee your stay here for the next 3 years. You'll be my class and responsibility," Aizawa said. Everyone in the classroom seemed to straighten up at that, but before those standing could sit at a desk, Aizawa spoke again. "Follow me immediately to one of the training fields. There, you'll find locker rooms with a sports uniform labeled with your name, tailored to your exact measurements. Put it on and wait outside for further instructions. Don't waste time," he said, walking away without so much as a glance back. Everyone hurried to follow him. Izuku was near the back of the group, trying to analyze the situation. "We're supposed to put on the sports uniform right away? Why so suddenly?" he thought, keeping a neutral expression. Without delay, all the aspiring heroes walked briskly, doing their best not to lose sight of their peculiar and enigmatic teacher. The walk was long. After about 15 minutes of steady walking, the school really was massive, they finally arrived at an outdoor training field. The ground was covered with dirt, marked by grooves and scratches that seemed to result from repeated exercises. On one side of the field stood a row of locker rooms with showers, clearly divided into men's and women's sections. Without wasting another second, the students rushed inside to change. "Wow, this is perfectly fitted, it's so comfortable and breathable. But I don't remember giving them my measurements," commented Kirishima, raising an eyebrow as he inspected his sports uniform. "You're absolutely right, man. I thought the same thing when we got the school uniforms. Do you think they have cameras spying on us or something?" Kaminari responded. He adopted an exaggeratedly paranoid stance, glancing around as if he truly feared they were being watched, which earned some laughs from the group. "Huh, you might be onto something, but the only cameras I remember were during the entrance exam. So, why are we doing this now? Shouldn't we be at orientation or the welcoming ceremony?" Added Hantasiro, a slim boy with black hair, as he finished adjusting his uniform, looking mildly puzzled. I admit this is a bit strange. My older brother also attended UA. He didn't give me many details about his experience here, but he did give me one piece of advice. Never take anything for granted and always expect the unexpected." Whatever he meant by that. Iida chimed in, his tone serious as he adjusted his glasses. Izuku stayed silent, attentively observing and listening to his classmates' conversation. Despite his extremely analytical nature, Izuku had found it nearly impossible to gather concrete information about how classes worked at UA. All he had been able to uncover were vague remarks from heroes and graduates, none of whom clearly described what the experience at the school was actually like. This lack of information could only mean one thing. "Surprise tests," Izuku murmured to himself as he stepped out onto the field. The rest of the class finished changing quickly and gathered around the teacher, who observed them with a visibly bored expression. "We need to improve your timing. It shouldn't take you this long to do something as simple as changing into your uniforms," Aizawa said, his grave voice cutting through the air with disinterest. He looked at the students as though even explaining the obvious was tedious. But moving on. We'll now conduct a quirk aptitude test. Most of the students, with the exception of a few, including Izuku, widen their eyes in surprise. And before anyone asks, forget about orientation and the welcoming ceremony. In the hero department, we don't have time for such formalities. That's why all that information was emailed to you. UA prides itself on granting freedom for growth and opportunities to its aspiring heroes. That same freedom extends to teachers, allowing them to structure their classes however they see fit. So guess what? That means I can adapt my lessons as I please. Aizawa paused, letting his words sink in among the students, who stared at him with astonishment and a hint of unease. With that out of the way, the teacher allowed a faint, almost imperceptible smirk to cross his face as his bored gaze landed on a particular student, a white-haired boy. He said, pointing with his finger, "You were first in the entrance exam, correct? Midoriya Izuku?" Izuku nodded calmly, though he noticed the murmurs among his classmates growing louder around him. "So, he was first? I heard he destroyed the 0-point robot. What's up with those dark glasses? You can't see anything through them." The comments spread among the students, but none of them seemed to notice how one particular blonde-haired boy, Bakugo, froze in place, his eyes wide open. "What?" was all Bakugo could mutter, his gaze fixed on the white-haired boy. Meanwhile, Izuku stepped forward with firm strides to the circle Aizawa indicated. At the center, the teacher tossed him a small ball, similar to a baseball, which Izuku caught in the air. "Your file says you were homeschooled. Have you ever done a ball throw test?" Aizawa asked, his monotone voice unchanged. "Oh yes. My mom used to make me do physical tests every year. The last time I threw one, I think it reached about 60 meters, Izuku replied, somewhat uncertain as he examined the ball. "In that case, I want you to throw the ball using your quirk. The method is up to you. You can do whatever you want, as long as you don't step out of the circle," Aizawa explained, giving him complete freedom in how he executed the task. Izuku took a few seconds to think, rubbing his chin in a reflective gesture. All right, this is the best option, he thought after a moment of deliberation. He took a deep breath and adopted a throwing stance, but to everyone's surprise he aimed in the opposite direction. Whoosh! The ball shot out, but it wasn't a particularly impressive throw. In fact, it didn't even seem like it was going to surpass the mentioned 60 meters, and on top of that, "Dude, I think you aimed the wrong way," Kaminari said, bewildered as everyone watched the ball continue its path, descending slowly. "That's because it's necessary to do this," Izuku replied, crouching down until he was in a squatting position. At that moment, everyone turned to him and watched in amazement as he jumped, reaching a height of 4 or 5 meters in an instant. As his upward momentum was about to wane, Izuku extended his right arm upward. With his open palm, everyone witnessed how the ball, which was about to touch the ground in the opposite direction, suddenly stopped and began speeding toward the young man's expectant hand. As the ball approached him, Izuku moved his hand with precise and elegant control, letting the ball continue its trajectory with an impressive boost of force. Izuku plummeted rapidly toward the ground, halting his descent mere centimeters above it by activating his infinity with a gesture from his left hand. Meanwhile, everyone stood slack-jawed, watching the ball hurtle into the horizon with unstoppable speed. After a few seconds, the ball finally touched the ground far away, and Aizawa raised his phone to display the distance marker. 954 meters? Several students shouted in unison, their faces plastered with shock. Aizawa directed his gaze at Izuku, who maintained a slight, satisfied smile. "Explain what you did," Aizawa ordered, never taking his eyes off him. "Well, my quirk allows me to pull objects toward me, so I figured the best way to make the ball travel farther was by using a parabolic shot. First, I threw it in the opposite direction to give it more distance, then I jumped to provide a favorable angle from which to pull it. Finally, I activated my pull ability to the max. Since force is constant and defined as mass times acceleration, FMA, the longer the ball is subjected to that acceleration, the greater its shooting velocity. That's why I launched it backward first, to give it more time to build speed and achieve the greatest possible distance, Izuku explained, a bit quickly, but without losing his composure. All the students stared at the white-haired boy in astonishment, including Bakugo, who looked on the verge of a meltdown from sheer confusion. Aizawa observed Izuku closely for a few seconds. He could have used the reinforcement he applied to his legs for jumping on his arms to throw it directly. But instead, he thought of a more efficient way to use his quirk, maximizing the result. The kid has creativity, he muttered with a slight smile before turning his attention back to the rest of the class. Just as Aizawa was about to continue with his instructions, an explosion of enthusiastic exclamations interrupted him abruptly. "Dude, this is awesome. I want to try it. This is going to be so fun." Aizawa raised his gaze, his voice resonating coldly, almost as if spitting out the words. "Fun, huh? So this seems fun to you? In that case, the student who scores the lowest after the 8 tests will be deemed useless and expelled immediately." His voice was flat, devoid of emotion, as if stating an unavoidable fact. The silence that followed was so profound that even the wind seemed to halt. The students looked at each other, trying to process what they just heard until someone finally broke the moment. "No, he can't be serious," Uraraka murmured, her voice trembling. Her brown eyes reflected a mix of disbelief and fear. "It's our first day." Kaminari stepped forward, his face pale with shock. What's up with that? This is totally unfair." "Unfair." Aizawa let the word hang in the air as if testing its weight. "Do you want to know what's truly unfair?" His eyes scanned the students as if assessing each of their faces, searching for the slightest hint of weakness. "Unfair is the society we live in, where any lunatic with a destructive quirk can show up out of nowhere and wreak havoc among the innocent. Unfair are the hundreds of accidents happening right now while we're here talking accidents that could be prevented if there were more trained heroes. Unfair are the hundreds of heroes who die in the field every year, sacrificing themselves to save lives, only for their names to be forgotten with time. That is what's unfair." His tone had risen slightly, but not enough to be a shout. It was more of a crescendo of bitterness. The students, unable to help themselves, took a step back as if the invisible pressure they felt before now pressed directly on their hearts. Aizawa narrowed his eyes, gauging his class's reactions before delivering his next blow. "Tell me something," he said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "When you're in a situation where you're about to die, or when the people you swore to protect are wiped out before your very eyes, are you going to scream that it's unfair? Are you going to cry and complain that your enemies cheated?" There was a long silence. No one dared to respond. Some clenched their fists, others lowered their gaze. "The job of a hero is not fun," Aizawa said firmly, like an unyielding sentence. "We are the profession with the highest mortality rate. I will not use the authority given to me to entertain a group of kids with naive hopes and empty dreams. I will not prepare you just to become cannon fodder and die before reaching your 3rd decade of life. If you want to be here, you must prove that you can handle this from the very beginning." He paused deliberately, ensuring his words resonated in each of their minds before delivering the final statement. "So I'll repeat. The student with the lowest score at the end of these trials will be expelled. This is plus ultra." The only audible sound on the field was that of the students' throats as they swallowed nervously, trying to calm themselves. Eyes filled with fear, anxiety, and tension crossed between them. However, something began to change. That mix of emotions slowly transformed into something else. Everyone, from the most confident to the most timid, raised their gaze with one common expression: determination. Aizawa noticed, but he didn't say anything. A faint glimmer of satisfaction flickered in his eyes before his neutral expression returned. Now, everything was in their hands. Even though Izuku maintained a focused look, conflict still churned in his mind. But how can he be so sure we don't have what it takes with just a few tests? "It doesn't make sense," the young man thought, clenching his fists in frustration. "Midoriya." "To the 50-meter track," Aizawa ordered. Izuku shook his head, pushing his doubts aside for the moment. and walked toward where the teacher had pointed. Upon arriving, he saw Kirishima already prepared at the starting line. Neither of them said a word. They simply took their positions, ready for the starting signal. I still don't have full control over the reinforcement flow to run efficiently. But no one said I can't. Jump. Izuku thought, his eyes shining behind his dark goggles as he bent his legs and launched himself with all his strength. His strategy, instead of running, he advanced with massive leaps, covering about 5 meters with each jump, 4.02 seconds, announced the mechanical voice of the timing robot. Izuku landed with one final leap, panting slightly. Despite the good time, his face showed dissatisfaction. Not enough. Focus. Optimize your energy. You must give it everything. He repeated to himself mentally, his gaze growing sharper with each passing second. The intensity of his self-criticism began consuming him, driving him into a state of hyper-focus on the trials. He didn't pay attention to his classmates' performances, and it seemed no one else did either. The camaraderie that had existed at the start of the day had vanished. Every aspirant was absorbed in overcoming the challenges, fighting with all their might to avoid being the one expelled. One by one, the trials continued. After the 50-meter dash came the pull-up challenge. Izuku used his attraction ability in a rudimentary and rough manner. Instead of pulling objects toward him as usual, he tried to make himself the moving object. His technique was unrefined, but it worked. Every time he pulled on the bar, his quirk gave him the extra boost needed to keep going. His effort allowed him to surpass all his classmates with a significant lead. However, the next trial, squats, didn't offer him the same advantage. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't think of a creative way to use his quirk for this activity. He was forced to do them the traditional way, essentially as if he had no powers at all. Meanwhile, Aizawa observed everything from his position, his face serious and his eyes half hidden behind his disheveled hair. He watched every detail of the students' performances, assessing not only their abilities but also their reactions under pressure. It seems my speech backed them into a corner. A logical reaction, he thought, watching as the students competed in silence. Though it's a shame they've lost sight of those around them. The grip strength test came next. Izuku, without wasting time, attempted something similar to what he had done during the entrance exam. Using his infinity and attraction, he applied his quirk on a smaller scale, concentrating it solely on his hand and the measuring device. The result was immediate. The device buckled under the pressure and broke with a loud crunch, recording an absolute record before shattering. But what's the next test? I still have energy. Think, Izuku, think. What else can I do? I need to. His thoughts stopped abruptly as he heard a nearby murmur. Diamenet. None of these tests suit my quirk, Jair whispered, her voice filled with frustration and anguish. Her fists were clenched, trembling slightly. As if a blndfld slipped from his eyes, Izuku finally noticed his classmate and, looking at her, realized something else. It wasn't just Jairu. Several of his classmates looked nervous, even desperate. Without thinking too much, Izuku approached the purple-haired girl. You're Jax. Can you control them completely? Are you able to coil them? He asked directly but with a calm tone. Midoriya? Jairu responded, startled, turning to him with a mix of surprise and confusion. It's your turn for the grip strength test, right? If you can control your Jax freely, use both to wrap around the device. That, combined with your hand, should significantly boost your score. Jairu's eyes widened as she heard his suggestion. You're right. I don't know why I didn't think of that before. The pressure is killing me. But if I use too much force, I might hurt myself. We're between a rock and a hard place, Jair. We have Recovery Girl in case you injure yourself. If there's a time to give it your all, it's now. Jairu looked at him in astonishment. Then, a faint smile crossed her face, and she nodded resolutely. You're right, Snow. It's now or never. Snow. Izuku thought, tilting his head in confusion at the nickname as he watched Jairu walk away with a renewed air of determination. This interaction did not go unnoticed by Aizawa, who observed from a distance, or maybe. Not everyone has lost sight of their classmates, he thought, a slight smile hidden behind his capture weapon. The next test was the standing long jump. Izuku paused for a moment to observe his classmates. This time he noticed Kaminari, an invisible girl, and the blonde with glasses who had accompanied Uraraka during the entrance exam. All three looked nervous. Approaching them, Izuku spoke in a low but clear tone. If you don't know the professional jumping technique, don't try to mimic it. It'll only worsen your performance. Instead, run at your maximum speed, and when you reach the jump line, push off with both feet. Then swing your legs forward as much as you can. Remember, the distance measured is where your feet land. Watch how I do it. Without further ado, Izuku headed toward the track where Aizawa was calling him. He ran hard, reinforcing his legs at the last moment, and executed a perfect jump. 5.4 meters, announced the robot. Izuku landed firmly and glanced at his classmates. He saw the three of them applying his advice. Although they didn't do it with precision, their effort kept them from landing in the bottom spots. The trials continued with side-to-side jumps and a grueling endurance race. Many students ended up exhausted, but Iida and Yaoyorozu stood out, using their quirks efficiently to maintain their pace. Meanwhile, Izuku observed, mentally noting their abilities. The final test was the ball throw. Having completed this test at the start as a demonstration, Izuku could rest while the rest of the class faced the challenge. However, it was clear that fatigue was taking its toll on everyone. One by one, the students threw the ball. Yaoyorozu attempted to use her quirk to create an object, but she fell short, visibly exhausted. Eventually, she managed to construct a rudimentary crossbow to complete her throw. The most impressive score came from Uraraka, who removed the ball's gravity, achieving an infinity on the scoreboard and taking first place from Izuku. Finally, it was the turn of the last student, the blonde with glasses whom Aizawa called Shield. Izuku noticed something strange. Throughout the test, he hadn't seen her use her quirk at all. All her scores had been entirely average, and she seemed to know it because she was trembling as she stepped toward the throwing circle. She was pale, her hands shaking, her expression full of doubt. She knows, Izuku thought, she knows she's on the brink of being in last place. Shield stood motionless for a moment, her nervousness evident. Izuku watched her closely, trying to guess what decision she would make. Trumish. Veins of energy spread across the blonde's arm, accompanied by a high-pitched sound that resonated in the air. Her skin began to glow faintly yellow, and steam rose from her limb. It was her sweat, evaporating instantly. The crowd gasped in amazement, but Izuku was transfixed, trying to understand how that energy nullified the properties of his glasses. Even with them, the glow and force of the compressed energy were almost blinding. With visible effort, Shield managed to retract the energy into her hand, where her fingertips glowed most intensely. Then, with a decisive motion, she threw the projectile. A deafening boom tore through the air as a cone of wind shook the surrounding students. The ball shot out at an incredible speed, and Aizawa's device registered 1,156 meters. But no one was paying attention to the distance. All eyes were fixed on Shield, whose arm was alarmingly bruised. Blood dripped from her fingertips, and though she bit her lip to stifle a scream, tears streamed freely down her face. Trumish. The glowing veins reappeared in her arm as her expression shifted to pure fear. Izuku instinctively took a step toward her, but the energy suddenly vanished. Shield let out a long sigh as the atmosphere calmed. Everyone turned toward Aizawa, who stood with his hair floating and his eyes glowing crimson. He's Eraserhead, Izuku thought in awe. Can you move, Shield? Aizawa asked, approaching as he returned to his normal appearance. Yes. I still can, she replied with a trembling smile, trying to maintain her composure. I've read your file. This is an improvement compared to the exam, but let me warn you, don't use your quirk again if you're not certain it won't harm you. We'll work on your training, but in the meantime, use the support devices listed in your file. Why don't you have them with you? Shield took a deep breath before responding, still holding her arm. There was a delay with the shipment from my island. They'll arrive this afternoon, government paperwork issues in Japan. Aizawa nodded and handed her a sheet of paper. You placed 18th, so head to the infirmary immediately. The blonde, her knees trembling, quickly made her way toward the infirmary. Whether it was relief at not being last or the accumulated pain from the trials, her hurried steps reflected both emotions. Meanwhile, the mention of Shield's ranking seemed to bring the rest of the class back to reality. Here are all the scores. It would be inefficient to announce them one by one, Aizawa stated. A few students let out sighs of relief upon realizing they wouldn't be eliminated. Izuku, however, paid little attention to his respectable third place. His eyes immediately focused on the name at the very bottom of the list, Toru Hagakure. No, this can't be happening. The feminine voice echoed faintly from the seemingly empty uniform floating in the air. The defeated, sorrowful tones snapped everyone out of their self-absorption. Hagakure, calm down. I'm sure the professor was only... Yayarosa began, but she was abruptly cut off by Aizawa. Hagakure, head to the principal's office to sign your expulsion papers. Wait for me there until I arrive. A choked sob escaped the invisible girl before her legs gave out, and she collapsed onto the ground. What? Was the expulsion threat serious? Yayarozu exclaimed, visibly agitated. Did you think I was joking? Aizawa replied coldly, his gaze sweeping over the class. Ashido and Uraraka rushed to Hagakure, hugging her and trying to console her, though their faces showed a mix of disbelief and fear. I tried so hard, and I failed right from the start, Hagakure said between sobs, her voice breaking with despair. Those words ignited something in Izuku's chest, a furious, uncontrollable flame. Without hesitation, he started walking not toward Hagakure, but directly to Aizawa. Snow? What are you doing? Jair asked, worried, noticing the serious expression and impassive look on Izuku's face. This is stupid, Izuku said firmly, stopping in front of the teacher. The air seemed to still as a murmur of surprise rippled through the students. Aizawa frowned, excuse me? I said this is stupid, Izuku repeated without hesitation. How can you determine that we lack the potential to be heroes based on just 8 physical tests? Aizawa's presence grew heavier, as if he were trying to crush Izuku with just his stare. The rest of the class watched, frozen, convinced that Izuku had just sealed his fate at UA. Do you think you have a better way to judge heroism? You, who are barely 16 years old. I don't know if I do, Izuku replied, his tone carrying a subtle edge. But I'm certain these basic tests are designed to highlight those with quirks that enhance physical abilities or powerful emitters. Hagakure's quirk is special, but it's not suited to this kind of exercise. Aizawa took a step closer, leaning toward Izuku. So I should just accept that she didn't stand out here? That she couldn't find a way to use her quirk creatively? Didn't you hear a word of what I said earlier? A hero must prevail, even when everything is against them. Not all of you has come from rich families. Izuku suddenly shouted, his voice thundering across the training field. Everyone fell silent, even Aizawa, whose face showed a flicker of surprise for the first time. Not all of us have the freedom to practice our quirks in specialized centers or giant private yards, Izuku continued, his voice unwavering. Many of us got here through sheer effort, practicing in limited ways, without resources, but with dreams and hopes. And now those hopes are crushed immediately? Under the excuse that we should know how to use our powers perfectly from the start? Seriously? Izuku stared directly into Aizawa's eyes, his posture firm and defiant. If that's what you believe, are you willing to walk out of here with Hagakure? Aizawa asked, his crimson eyes glowing intensely, his hair beginning to float, a clear sign that his quirk was active. Izuku, lost in his thoughts, didn't even notice the oppressive aura from the activation. His eyes stayed locked on Aizawa, and his voice came out steady and decisive. If this is all you can offer, then I guess I'll accompany her to the principal's office. If we're already expected to master our powers as if they've always been a part of us, what's the point of this school? The air grew thick with tension. The silence of the confrontation stretched for seconds that felt like an eternity. Aizawa, without breaking eye contact, deactivated his quirk suddenly, and to everyone's shock, a relaxed smile spread across his face. You're definitely a problem child, Aizawa said with a calm, almost amused tone. Huh. was all Izuku managed to say, bewildered by the sudden shift. The murmurs of disbelief began to spread among the students. Ignoring them, Aizawa addressed the group with a more sincere tone. I'll be honest. When Hagakure reached the principal's office, she was going to be expelled and immediately readmitted. What? Nearly everyone exclaimed in unison. It's a test. Every year, I expel at least one student, but I reinstate them on the spot. Because I want to open your eyes and ensure you don't take this as a game. I don't want soldiers devoid of thought or joy, but I also don't want you to forget that here, you can fail. But out there you cannot. Aizawa's words struck a chord. Some students began to relax, while others, like Yaoyorozu, remained tense, letting out a small sigh as her earlier predictions seemed to be confirmed. However, Aizawa continued. But not all my expulsions are fake. Some people lack the mindset to be heroes or the intent to learn. Those are the ones who truly leave. The seriousness in his tone made several students swallow hard. The pressure in the air returned briefly, though only for a moment. I'm telling you this now because it's no longer necessary to maintain the illusion. It seems like you've all understood the point. Though I admit, it's the first time someone stood up to me, he said, casting an amused glance at Izuku. Izuku, noticing the attention on him, felt his cheeks heat up immediately. Your classmate is correct. We don't expect you to control your powers from the start. I assure you, by the end of your training, you'll be capable of things you can't even imagine now, Aizawa continued as he approached Izuku. Placing a hand on his shoulder, he added, I don't know what kind of life you've had before coming here, and you don't have to tell me, but I'm sorry for today's trick. He turned to face the rest of the group. My apologies to all of you. This is something I consider crucial for you to understand. I don't want any of you to die out there. The entire class remained silent, confused. The emotional roller coaster they had experienced was overwhelming. Midoriya, you may have faced disappointments in the past, may have been let down by those who should have helped you. But give us the benefit of the doubt. I'll do everything I can to help you achieve your dream. I hope you put the same spirit into it that you showed today. Understood? Izuku nodded awkwardly, still processing everything that had just happened. That's all for today. You must be exhausted. Remember, just because we're fair doesn't mean we're not judging you. Give your best and then give a little more. Welcome to your academy. As I said before, this is Plus Ultra. With those words, Aizawa left, leaving the class in a state of disbelief. What was that? Why do I feel so embarrassed? But at the same time, happy, proud. Izuku thought, feeling his ears burn. Midoriya! Hagakure shouted, leaping onto his back and hugging him tightly. Hagakure? What are you doing? Izuku asked, his surprise and blush intensifying. You defended me. You were so cool standing up to Aizawa. Even though in the end it wasn't necessary, Hagakure said with laughter, still hiccuping lightly. That was so manly, bro, added Kirishima, giving him a thumbs up. Your behavior was impulsive, but no less heroic, Iida commented. This is the second time I've done something without thinking. Izuku lamented, covering his face with his hands. The second? Suro asked, curious. The first was against the 0-point robot in the entrance exam. Izuku admitted, visibly embarrassed. And that was just as heroic as today. You're amazing, Midoriya, Uraraka exclaimed, her eyes sparkling with admiration. Wow, Snow. The teacher was right, you really are a problem child, Jur teased, laughing as she poked his arm with her jacks. Just let the ground swallow me whole. Izuku said, as the rest laughed at his obvious embarrassment. From the shadow of a building, a tall, skeletal man with blonde hair observed the scene with a nostalgic smile. What an interesting boy, he murmured before disappearing into the shadows. The evening had fallen over UA, and the campus was almost empty. A few upperclassmen still lingered, but none from Class 1A remained except Izuku. He had politely declined his classmates' invitations to head to the train station together. It wasn't that he didn't like them, he simply needed time to process everything after the emotional whirlwind of the day. Despite not having exerted himself heavily with his quirk, his chest and mind felt utterly drained. The weight of everything that had happened, mixed with the new faces and overwhelming expectations, left him feeling saturated. There was another reason he stayed behind. Bakugo. Throughout the tests, the explosive blonde hadn't stopped glaring at him with his usual intense gaze. Izuku knew it was only a matter of time before he confronted him, something he wasn't ready to deal with today. He decided to remain on campus late, wandering around aimlessly, taking in the environment. I'm not giving that a-hole the opportunity of ambushing me, he thought with a mixture of exhaustion and stubbornness as he strolled with no clear destination. If Bakugo tried anything, Izuku already had a response in mind. Sure, practicing his blue technique on him might be overkill. But the thought brought a small smile to his face. I forgot how exhausting school could be, he sighed as he finally headed toward the exit. Just as he was about to step off campus grounds, a flash of blonde hair caught his attention. His body tensed immediately, thinking it might be Bakugo. However, he stopped as he recognized Melissa. Wait a second. Didn't she mention Island? He recalled suddenly, feeling a spark of excitement. The thought thrilled him. Melissa could be related to David Shield, All Might's former partner in America. For a brief moment, he imagined asking her questions and learning more about the #1 hero during his international career. But reality quickly brought him back down. First, I should make sure she's okay, he murmured, remembering the injuries she had suffered during the tests. Melissa walked at a slow, almost unsteady pace, her expression drowsy. It was clear she was coming from a long session with Recovery Girl. Izuku watched her for a moment until a thought crossed his mind. Shield's quirk. It managed to bypass my glasses. Curiosity consumed him, and without thinking much, he lowered his glasses slightly to observe her directly. The sound of the round glasses hitting the ground echoed in the quiet air. Izuku froze. His eyes were locked on Melissa, but his expression was blank, almost frozen in place. If someone had looked closely, they would have noticed cold sweat dripping down his neck and sliding down his back. With a quick motion, he picked up his glasses, placed them back on his face, and ran. He sprinted past the station and didn't stop until he reached his house. His uniform was drenched in sweat, and his breathing was erratic. It wasn't until he closed the door to his room that he finally allowed himself to pause. Leaning against the door, his chest heaved. A persistent ringing in his ears gradually faded as his senses returned to normal. What the hell? What the hell was that? He whispered hoarsely, still feeling the traces of fear. It didn't take him long to understand what had gripped him, pure terror. A primal instinct, as though his body had recognized something deadly about Shield and commanded him to flee. Since awakening his quirk, Izuku had discovered a secondary ability tied to his eyes. He could easily identify people with emitter-type quirks. It wasn't directly connected to his energy manipulation. Instead, it was an additional perception, a sensitivity he described as the ability to see primordial energy. He compared this energy to crude oil-dense and unrefined, while the energy he manipulated was akin to refined, high-octane gasoline. In people with emitter quirks, this primordial energy was stored within them, flowing through channels or pipes, connecting the points where their quirk manifested. For instance, he remembered seeing the heroes water hose before their tragic deaths. He could observe how their primordial energy flowed from their hands to create water. There was even a secondary system leading to their feet, though underdeveloped. He had assumed it was untapped potential. Shield, however. How the hell does Shield break both paradigms? He thought, sitting at his desk, his mind still on high alert. First, where the hell does that absurd amount of energy come from? And where does she store it? He murmured, burying his hands in his hair with frustration. He remembered seeing people with various sizes of energy reserves, but Shield was different. She was a supernova, gigantic, radiant, and almost tangible, as if it altered reality itself. It makes no sense. No one can store that much energy in their body. Does she use a pocket dimension? I don't know. But I've never seen anything like it. He took a deep breath, trying to calm himself, but his confusion only grew. And second, she has no distribution system in her body. My eyes should have detected at least residual energy or some sort of channel, But she has nothing. He recalled the moment S.H.I.E.L.D. had tried to use her quirk, how her arm had simply burst under the energy's pressure. It's like trying to force water through a faucet that doesn't have an opening. There's no way to channel it. It's like she's submerged her body in pure magma and expects to control it through sheer willpower. How can someone have that quirk for 10 or 11 years and their body hasn't adapted even a little? His voice trailed off as he stared out his window. The image of S.H.I.E.L.D.'s immense power remained etched in his mind. Suddenly, a thought hit him like a bucket of cold water. Is she a living bomb? The possibility made him tremble. If that energy ever spiraled out of control, everything around her would be annihilated. I should report this to the school. Do they already know? He murmured, clutching his head in frustration. S.H.I.E.L.D. seemed like a genuinely kind person, but the danger her lack of control posed was undeniable. But she's trying to be a hero. What better place to learn how to use her power than here, under the supervision of someone like Aizawa, who can neutralize her quirk? With a sigh, Izuku tried to calm himself. He opened his backpack and pulled out his UA training notebook. Knowing his mother wouldn't be home due to her night shift at the hospital, he took advantage of the solitude. Flipping to a fresh page, he began writing. Name, Melissa S.H.I.E.L.D. Quirk, unknown. Danger level, special grade. End of chapter text. That's all for today, listeners. Remember to practice the vocabulary for our next class, said Present Mike as he exited the classroom with his usual contagious energy. An English class, taught by a pro hero. It might seem unnecessary to many, but Izuku was certain that the real reason all the teachers at UA were pro heroes had to do with the security and secrecy surrounding the academy. The fact that they were professional heroes meant they were trained to handle any type of scenario and reported directly to the principal, not the education board. Moreover, they all seemed to share a similar mindset, which reinforced trust among the staff. This safety net ensured the protection of both the academy and its students. After all, UA had access to highly confidential information about aspiring heroes, and if that information fell into the wrong hands, the danger would be incalculable. Izuku leaned back in his seat with a slight sigh, stretching to relieve the tension in his back. Who would have thought UA could provide such a normal classroom environment? He thought wryly. Of course, Aizawa had done an excellent job of keeping them on edge from day one, perhaps too good a job. Now, Izuku couldn't help but feel a bit bored during the more traditional classes. Then again, it might also have to do with the fact that he had spent most of his academic life without following a fixed schedule. Only time would tell how much it would cost him to adjust to UA's routine pace. Although, on the other hand, it was the third day at UA, and Izuku had taken every opportunity to discreetly observe a certain blonde whenever he finished his exercises or readings. His completely dark glasses and his ability to observe at a 180-degree range without needing to focus his eyes directly were perfect tools for staying unnoticed. Could anyone blame him for being a little paranoid? Ever since that first glance at Melissa S.H.I.E.L.D. on the first day, Izuku had been taking notes on every detail he could discover about the girl. However, he always reached the same conclusion: S.H.I.E.L.D.'s quirk shouldn't be possible. But aside from the things he had already deduced, there was one issue he hadn't considered at first but now found unsettling. It was impossible for S.H.I.E.L.D. to have accumulated so much energy on her own. How had he reached that conclusion? Over these 3 days, using the special perception granted by his eyes, Izuku had noticed something strange. Melissa's energy increased passively, even when she wasn't doing anything. The increase wasn't substantial, but with quick calculations, it was evident that if this pattern had continued for 10 or 11 years, the amount of energy she had accumulated didn't add up. It was impossible by his estimates. She should only have about 1/10 of that energy, and that was being generous. The only plausible explanation he could think of was that S.H.I.E.L.D.'s quirk had some aspect of energy absorption from other sources. But that theory had its flaws too. First, why would she absorb more energy if she knew that the more she had, the harder it would be to control? And second, what source could provide her with pure, primal energy? Izuku frowned, uneasy. Every answer seemed to lead to more questions, and the mystery of Melissa S.H.I.E.L.D. continued to grow in his mind. Talking directly to S.H.I.E.L.D. seemed like a simple option, but Izuku wasn't sure it was the right one. After all, it could be awkward for someone practically a stranger to bombard her with questions about her quirk. Even more so considering that she needed support equipment to use it, which suggested the topic might be sensitive for her, similar to what happened with Aoyama. And that blonde was intriguing too, although not as much as Melissa. There was something peculiar about him. Aoyama, the naval laser user, also relied on support equipment. However, the pipes inside his body looked odd, undeveloped, and, to be honest, deformed, as if they had gone through rapid, careless growth. What kind of life must Aoyama have led to suffer those changes? Izuku wondered about what might be another sensitive topic. Finally, he decided to refrain from asking either of them any questions. Snow? Midoriya. The loud voice from Jiru suddenly snapped him out of his thoughts. Oh, what's up, Jiru? Izuku replied, blinking to refocus on his classmate. What's up? More like, what's up with you? I've been trying to get your attention for a while, but it seems like your mind's somewhere else. Did English class fry your brain? The purple-haired girl joked, recalling how Izuku always seemed particularly worried about his head. Oh no, nothing like that. I was just thinking about something. Izuku excused himself, scratching his neck with a smile. Tell me, are you ready for our first heroics class? Excited and a little nervous. Who do you think our teacher will be? Well, I really have no idea. From what I understand, we won't have a fixed teacher, Izuku reflected, bringing a hand to his chin. But if you ask me, it'd be great to have ectoplasm. Think about it. He could give us individual advice and supervise everyone simultaneously with his clones, ensuring we all get personalized attention. It'd be incredibly efficient. Wow. I hadn't thought of it that way, but now that you mention it, I can't help but agree with you, Midoriya. Iida chimed in, joining the conversation with his usual enthusiasm. There's also Aizawa, and even though he still freaks me out a little, you can tell he has tons of experience, Shoji added, approaching the group. Especially considering he's an underground hero. They face the worst, the most twisted things out there. Whoever it is, I plan to make the most of it, Izuku said, a spark of excitement on his face. And I also plan to ask if we can reserve gyms for private training. I really want to explore the limits of my quirk. The other three nodded with a smile, infected by the white-haired boy's enthusiasm and diligence. The sound of the door opening abruptly drew everyone's attention to the front. I am entering like a normal person, exclaimed a towering, muscular figure with a flawless smile. All might. Everyone shouted in unison, their voices full of surprise and excitement. Izuku felt his heart skip a beat. Oh, it can't be. Since when is he a teacher? Could this be a recent thing? I can't believe he's going to teach us heroics. And he's wearing the Silver Age suit. He thought, trembling slightly in his seat as he tried to process what he was seeing. The murmurs of awe and excitement spread through the classroom like wildfire. All eyes were fixed on the number one hero, who now strode to the front of the room with an overwhelming presence. All right, newbies. All Might began with his characteristic enthusiasm. Welcome to your first heroics class. In coordination with Aizawa, I'll be in charge of supervising the combat aspect. And since I see you're starting to feel comfortable in the academy, it's time to push you to your limits again. That's why we'll have a battle scenario. His declaration was accompanied by an energetic flex of his arms that drew looks of astonishment and anticipation. A battle? But isn't it too soon for something that advanced? Karo, asked Azui, her tone calm but curious. It'll be a simple scenario with basic rules, All Might smiled. The goal is to get a first look at your abilities while you test yourselves in situations more complex than just destroying robots. The rest of the class nodded. But before we begin, All Might continued, raising a small controller he pulled from his belt. You can't go into battle dressed like that. With a click, one of the classroom walls slid open, revealing multiple shelves filled with black suitcases, each marked with a number. If you want to step into your future as heroes, you must look the part. Our hero suits, exclaimed Kirishima, grinning from ear to ear. This is so exciting. Ashido yelled, bouncing in her seat. All Might's broad smile grew even wider as he pointed toward the door. I'll meet you at Training Ground Beta. You have 15 minutes to change and be ready. The clock's ticking, young heroes. In a blink, All Might disappeared from the classroom. His speed was such that no one could follow him. Wow. He just vanished, Kaminari murmured, his jaw practically on the floor. You heard him, class. Let's not waste any time, said Iida, immediately standing up, grabbing his suitcase, and heading briskly to the exit. The rest of the students followed suit, their enthusiasm and anticipation filling the room. All Might watched attentively at the exit of the locker room tunnel as the first students began to emerge. 13 minutes. It seems Aizawa really drilled the importance of time into them. Not bad for rookies, he thought, a wide smile forming on his face. The atmosphere quickly filled with enthusiastic comments as the students admired each other's hero suits. Wow, your suit is amazing. It looks like something out of a sci-fi movie, Ashido exclaimed, hopping excitedly as she looked at Uraraka. Thanks. Yours is awesome too, Uraraka replied, scratching the back of her neck with a mix of pride and embarrassment. Although, honestly, I expected mine to be looser. I didn't think it'd be so tight. Ashido paused for a moment, but her eyes widened slightly when she saw another classmate step out of the locker room. Well, if you were worried about it being too revealing, I think someone's already beaten you, she said with a light laugh, pointing toward Yaoyorozu. Uraraka followed Ashido's gaze and felt her cheeks heat up as she saw their classmate's outfit. Well, I guess her quirk depends on having as much skin exposed as possible, but there are other alternatives, murmured Shield, joining the conversation. Ashido and Uraraka turned toward the blonde and smiled as they took in her suit. Melissa's outfit was a one-piece jumpsuit in a deep red tone with golden lines tracing elegant yet functional details. It featured visible reinforcements on the knees and elbows and a multi-tool belt with at least 6 strategically placed pockets. Her golden boots, sturdy and with a military design, complemented the practical look of the suit. However, what truly stood out were the gloves she wore, red with golden details, made from a material that appeared spiraled, clearly the most technologically advanced component of the ensemble. Are those the support gadgets Aizawa mentioned? Asked Ashido, curious. Shield nodded, though her face showed a slight hint of embarrassment. Yes. They finally arrived. My goal is to not need them in the long term. But for now, they're indispensable. You already saw what happens if I don't wear them. A nervous smile appeared on her face as she recalled the damage from the first day. Uraraka and Ashido nodded, sharing a somewhat awkward smile as they remembered the incident. From a distance, All Might observed the interaction with satisfaction. It was good to see Melissa integrating so seamlessly with the group. David had insisted that Niza be informed of all the details of her situation, and now All Might knew it had been the right decision. The Chimera had taken cautious measures, giving precise instructions to Aizawa and the rest of the staff about Melissa's unique circumstances without revealing the secret of One for All. It's nice to see her smiling so brightly, thought All Might, his expression softening as he remembered what David had told him. Even as the daughter of a great inventor, being born without a quirk had affected Melissa's ability to make friends in the past. Now it seemed like all that was starting to change. Still, there was a long road ahead. All Might knew his greatest responsibility was to teach Melissa to control One for All without relying on her support gadgets. Who would have thought a visit to Island would change my understanding of the power that was passed on to me? He thought with a hint of self-criticism. After all, if it hadn't been for David, All Might would never have understood the terrible consequences of passing One for All to someone with a pre-existing quirk. Just thinking about the results of those tests and the subsequent investigations into past wielders made the symbol of Peace's hair stand on end. His non-existent stomach churned as he imagined what might have been young Togata's fate had he inherited the quirk. At the same time, it was ironic that Melissa had been born without a quirk. That absence made her the ideal candidate, both technically and spiritually. With her pure mindset and innate sense of justice, Melissa embodied what One for All sought in a wielder. Of course, there had been some emotional challenges initially, as Melissa had thought she was chosen solely because of her condition. Both David and All Might had worked to correct this misconception, explaining to her that it was more of a fortunate coincidence. And it was true, as Toshinori had considered her from the very beginning, even before knowing everything. With a renewed smile, All Might set those thoughts aside and refocused on his immediate task, teaching and guiding the future heroes who now looked at him expectantly. Amazing, Jair. Your suit looks great, commented Yaoyorozu with a warm smile. Jair merely shrugged, clearly embarrassed both by the compliment and by the revealing nature of the black-haired girl's outfit. She's right, Jair. Your suit has a lot of style, added Izuku as he approached. Both girls turned their heads toward him, their curiosity piqued by his outfit. Izuku's suit consisted of loose black cargo pants filled with multiple pockets, tucked neatly into black combat boots. On top, he wore a dark blue high-collared jacket that covered his neck without obstructing his face. Completing the ensemble were his signature completely black round glasses. Yours doesn't look bad either, Snow, commented Jairo, observing his suit with interest. That's true, it also looks pretty practical, added Yaoyorozu. Izuku smiled. I'm not too concerned about aesthetics. Besides, my quirk is versatile enough that I don't need support gear, so I decided to keep it as basic and functional as possible. It might not be flashy, but it's made of the same material as Hawk's suit, highly resistant but very flexible, he explained, slightly moving his boots to demonstrate his continued agility. I also added several pockets to the pants for things like suppressor cuffs, bandages, and gauze. Though I haven't included them yet, hehe. It seems we had similar ideas, commented Ojiro, joining the conversation. Mine has the look of a combat GI, but it's also made from Hawk's suit material. I read an article about its properties and knew it was what I wanted. Exactly. You read it too? This material should be a standard. Luckily, UA has the resources to make it happen, said Izuku, admiring his suit. Coughed All Might, drawing everyone's attention and interrupting the conversation. Look at yourselves, young rookies. The suit doesn't make the hero, but you can't deny it makes everything feel more real. And speaking of realism, let me explain today's activity, announced All Might as everyone turned toward him, focused. Today's exercise will be a heroes versus villains scenario. Teams of 2 will be chosen at random through a lottery. The goal of the lottery is to prepare you to work with pro heroes you've never met once you graduate. The students nodded in understanding as All Might continued with a smile. The dynamics are as follows. The villains will enter a building to hide a nuclear bomb device. They'll have 5 minutes to prepare. Then, the heroes will enter the building to confront them. The villains win if they capture the heroes or if the heroes fail to reach the bomb before time runs out. Conversely, the heroes win if they secure the bomb before time runs out or if they capture the villains. You'll be able to communicate remotely with your team using earpieces, and capturing will be achieved by either forcing surrender or handcuffing your opponents with these, he said, showing a pair of metal cuffs. Excluding the 5 minutes of preparation, the exercise will have a 20-minute time limit. All Might looked at the class seriously, offering one last piece of advice. Remember, most battles don't take place outdoors like the ones on the news but in closed spaces. Heroes, treat this as a real situation. He paused to see if anyone had questions. When no one spoke, he moved toward a screen that would display the teams. Pressing a button, the screen lit up with the lottery results. Team A, Ochako Uraraka and Melissa Shield. Team B, Mizo Shoji and Shoto Todoroki. Team C, Momo Yaoyorozu and Tsuyu Azui. Team D, Katsuki Bakugo and Tenya Iida. Team E, Mina Ishido and Yuga Aoyama. Team F, Koji Koda and Rikido Sato. Team G, Kyoka Jiru and Denki Kaminari. Team H, Izuku Midoriya and Fumikage Tokoyami. Team I, Mashareo Ojiro and Toru Hagakure. Team J, Eijiro Kirishima and Hantasiro. The students looked at the list, turning to their teammates with glances of anticipation or curiosity. Alright, without further delay, the first match will be Team J as heroes versus Team H as villains, announced All Might with the energy that elevated the room's excitement. Villains, your 5 minutes will begin once you enter the building. Go! Izuku stepped toward the building entrance alongside his teammate, Fumikage Tokoyami, a young man of similar height with a unique feature. His head bore crow-like characteristics, with a prominent beak and feathers replacing hair, completely covering his face. Both entered the building, passing through the ground floor and ascending to the third level, where the bomb was located. Meanwhile, the rest of the class, along with All Might, observed from a nearby building equipped with surveillance screens. Upon reaching the room where the bomb was located, Izuku turned toward his teammate with a friendly smile. "Tokoyami, right? Nice to meet you. I hadn't had the chance to talk to you yet," he said, extending his hand. "That's correct. A pleasure, Midoriya," Tokoyami responded with his usual serious demeanor. "Well, could you tell me what your quirk is?" "Honestly, I didn't pay much attention during the first day. I was hyper-focused on my own performance." "I apologize for that," Izuku added, rubbing the back of his neck with a nervous smile. "It's perfectly understandable. The shadow that loomed over us that dark day made us lose sight of the path," Tokoyami responded enigmatically. Izuku found the other teenagers' theatrical style amusing, though he kept that to himself. "As for my quirk, do not succumb to fear," Tokoyami said solemnly, as his shadow projected on the floor began to stretch. Izuku watched in fascination as a towering figure emerged from the ground, at least 3 meters long. Its tone was pure white, yet its appearance was monstrous. It lacked eyes, but its head featured a jaw filled with sharp teeth, and from the back extended tentacle-like appendages resembling hair, also white. Its semi-humanoid, muscular torso had long arms ending in clawed hands, but its body blurred toward the lower half, turning into a nebulous shadow like a ghostly apparition. The being remained still, displaying its teeth in what could only be described as a cruel smile. Although Izuku should have felt intimidated, something about the creature captivated him, compelling him to keep observing, utterly fascinated. "My quirk, Dark Shadow," Tokoyami declared, tilting his head slightly as if gauging Izuku's reaction. Fumii, why do you call me Dark Shadow? Fumii knows I'm Rika. Fumii is mean to Rika," the figure exclaimed in a feminine, childlike tone. "Rika?" Izuku thought, surprised by the contrast between the creature's tone and appearance. "Rika, you know I can't call our quirk by your name. Dark Shadow is just the official term. But I do know you're Rika," Tokoyami responded, a mix of weariness and fondness in his tone. "You have a sentient quirk. That's amazing," Izuku murmured, impressed by the interaction between the two. Fumia, look, the white-haired one isn't scared of us," Rika said, amused. "That seems to be the case." "I must admit, this is a first," Tokoyami remarked, intrigued. "Oh, it's just that I've never seen a sentient quirk before. It's incredible. But why do you call your quirk Dark Shadow?" Izuku asked curiously. "Well, it's because of Rika's appearance. I thought it was fitting," Tokoyami explained. "But she's white, isn't she?" "Only her base is dark," Izuku observed. At this, Tokoyami's eyes widened, and Rika fell silent. "You can actually see her true form?" Tokoyami asked, stunned. Izuku looked at him, puzzled. "I mean, she's right here," he shrugged. "Yes, but everyone else only sees a dark shadow. I was the only one who could perceive her true appearance. I thought it was because of our bond, but you also have this ability," Tokoyami said, disbelief evident in his voice. The revelation left Izuku momentarily stunned, but an idea formed in his mind. "I think it's because of my eyes." "May I?" he asked, addressing both of them. Rika looked expectantly at Tokoyami, who slowly nodded. Izuku removed his glasses, revealing his intensely glowing blue irises. Tokoyami's feathers bristled, while Rika assumed a protective stance. "Interesting, it seems you share an energy similar to mine, but it's used in a completely different way. Yet, it feels so familiar," Izuku murmured, utterly fascinated. "It's the first time I've seen someone with my same energy. It's not primal energy, it's the one I control," he thought as he extended his hand toward Rika. "Midoriya?" Tokoyami asked nervously. Izuku snapped out of his thoughts and withdrew his hand. "Sorry, it's just that my quirk allows me to control an energy that only I can see." But it seems like Rika is made of that energy, except she has her own consciousness. It's amazing and complicated, Izuku admitted, both embarrassed and in awe. This is enigmatic, but we should focus on the exercise, Tokoyami said, shaking his head to clear his thoughts. You're absolutely right, Izuku said, putting his glasses back on. Well, my quirk lets me manipulate the energy I mentioned earlier. So far, I've been using it to pull objects toward me or pull myself toward them. The latter is a recent development, and I don't have full control over it yet. Additionally, I can use the energy to enhance my body, giving me a significant physical boost, he explained professionally. Tokoyami nodded, processing the information. Rika and I share a unique bond. We can communicate mentally without needing words. She's always with me, even when I don't manifest her, which is both a strength and a weakness. For her to manifest, she must emerge from my shadow, although if my shadow connects with others, she can manifest and return through those as well. Once manifested, she takes the form you can see, incredibly strong and fast. However, the farther she gets from me, the weaker she becomes. Unfortunately, the nature of my quirk means that keeping her in this plane consumes a lot of my stamina. But we've discovered that as long as she remains submerged in shadows, the energy drain is nearly zero. Still, there's one limitation. The speed at which she emerges from the shadows is fixed. You've seen it takes about 3 seconds for her to fully appear, which makes quick in and out movements challenging, Tokoyami explained in detail. Izuku listened attentively, nodding as he absorbed every word. It's impressive, said Izuku, with a mix of seriousness and fascination. Then, after a few seconds of reflection, he continued, Do you have any ideas on how we'll face the other team? Tokoyami looked at him, considering his words. Not particularly. Do you have any suggestions? Izuku smiled slightly, bringing a hand to his chin. We could move the bomb to another floor. If we analyze the structure of the building, it has 7 levels in total. The best strategy would be to place the bomb on the 4th floor, right in the middle. That way, no matter if the opposing team comes from above or below, it'll take them the same amount of time to reach us. However, he made a deliberate pause, looking at Tokoyami intently. I think it would be more advantageous to stay here on the 3rd floor. Tokoyami frowned, curious. Why is that? If you notice, the room we're in now is spacious and completely lacks windows. The air comes from the ventilation system, which means the only source of light here is the lamps. If we eliminate them, the darkness will be absolute, and that would allow Rika to emerge from anywhere, wouldn't it? Besides, even if it takes her 3 seconds, as long as we have the darkness on our side, she can move literally anywhere. Finally, Rika's size is quite large. A battle in a confined space like the hallways would only obstruct her movements. Here, however, she can move freely once manifested. Izuku explained logically. Tokoyami nodded, impressed. But, wouldn't that be a hindrance for you? He asked, somewhat concerned. Izuku shook his head with an enigmatic smile. Oh, don't worry about that. As you might have noticed, my eyes aren't normal. Let's just say I have a few tricks up my sleeve, he said, sliding his glasses slightly to reveal the intense blue glow of his irises. Tokoyami felt a chill run down his spine again. Despite his unease, he nodded. All right, if this can increase our chances of victory, we'll do it, said Tokoyami with determination. Perfect. That aside, I think it'd be best if you're the main attacker while I provide support. That way, I can focus primarily on guarding the bomb. My quirk will allow me to protect it quite well. You could even say it'll make it untouchable, added Izuku with a smile that mixed amusement and mystery. Tokoyami observed him closely. There was something about Izuku that made him uneasy. His composure, his way of speaking, and above all, those glowing eyes behind his dark glasses. However, he hadn't shown any rejection or fear toward Rika, which was unusual. Moreover, Izuku acknowledged her as an independent entity, not just a quirk. That was something Tokoyami deeply valued. Let's see where this leads. Tokoyami thought. Sounds good, Midoriya. May the darkness bring us victory over our enemies, declared Tokoyami solemnly. Izuku nodded with a smile, turning toward the bomb to ensure it was properly set. He's back to speaking mysteriously. I guess that means he's regained his composure, Izuku thought, amused. Suddenly, Rika's voice, which had remained silent, echoed in Tokoyami's mind. Fumii. What is it? Tokoyami responded mentally, intrigued. Beware the white-haired one. There's something about him. What do you mean? He reeks. Tokoyami frowned, puzzled. Even with his enhanced sense of smell due to his bird-like mutations, he didn't detect anything unusual about Izuku. Reeks? What do you mean exactly? Yes. He reeks of negativity, Rika replied, her tone filled with unease. Tokoyami was stunned. It was the first time Rika had mentioned something like this. He's. What's the word you use? Yes, I remember now. Fumii, I think. I think he's cursed. Rika's voice carried a tone Tokoyami had never heard before. Tokoyami's eyes widened in surprise as he cautiously observed Izuku, who was still checking the papier-mâché bomb, unaware of the mental conversation happening between the two. What the hell is that? Jairu exclaimed in evident terror. I think it's Tokoyami's quirk. Iida responded, stuttering slightly as he observed the sinister figure emerging. What kind of quirk is that? Sato asked, trembling a bit as he watched the figure sink back into Tokoyami's shadow. It seems Midoriya isn't scared. Kaminari commented, forcing a smile as he noticed the calm expression on the white-haired boy. Haven't you seen it before? During the first day's tests, Tokoyami used that shadow, Yayarosa said, curious. Yeah, but most of us were distracted by the whole expulsion thing, Kero, Azui replied, and several classmates nodded in agreement. Meanwhile, All Might observed the scene attentively, suppressing a slight shiver as he recalled the imposing figure of Tokoyami's quirk. He corrected himself mentally, Rika. He knew that quirk was sentient, which made it all the more fascinating and terrifying. Heroes. You may enter, All Might said through the Team J's earpieces. In the observation room, the murmurs ceased immediately as everyone watched Kirishima and Siro enter the building. The two heroes advanced together from the ground floor, quickly checking the rooms, though their method seemed a bit careless. They're exposing themselves a lot, but rushing in could work for them depending on the situation, All Might thought, observing with interest. When they reached the third floor, the class watched as the hero team approached the door where Izuku and Tokoyami were. Suddenly, on the monitors, the white-haired boy was seen extending his hand toward a corner of the ceiling. As if by magic, pieces of the ceiling began to fall away, revealing a pipe that was easily torn out. And then, darkness. What happened? I can't see anything. Shoji exclaimed, frustrated. It seems Midoriya cut the power lines. They might have turned off the cameras, Iida commented. The cameras are still working, All Might intervened calmly, pressing a button on the control panel. Instantly, the monitors displayed the scene again, this time in shades of green. Night vision. Cool. Ashido said, her eyes filled with excitement as she continued to watch. But why did he turn the lights off in the first place? Hagakure asked curiously. Kirishima and Siro, who were silently moving through the hallway, noticed the lights flickering slightly before going out completely. The two teens glanced at each other for a moment, shrugging. Kirishima, determined, approached another door on the floor they were searching. W.I.A. The door creaked as it opened, revealing what looked like a storage room enveloped in absolute darkness. Only a few feet of the floor were dimly illuminated by the faint natural light seeping in from the hallway windows. What? We've got to check it out, right? Kirishima asked, though his voice betrayed some insecurity. I'll go in. My helmet has a light, Siro replied, trying to sound calm, though he was clearly nervous. Siro turned on his helmet's lamp and stepped cautiously into the room. The wide space was filled with disorganized shelves and stacked boxes. The place looked more like an old storage area than one of the rooms they'd inspected before. Suddenly, Siro's eyes widened. Bingo! There's the bomb, he said, pointing to the back of the storage room. Really? Kirishima asked, grinning as he followed his teammate into the room. Wait, where are Midoriya and Tokoyami? Siro asked, pausing for a moment. The storage room door slammed shut, making both of them jump in surprise. I don't like this, not one bit, huh? Kirishima laughed nervously, pressing his back against Zero's. The latter was now holding the only light source in the darkness. A small trace of dust fell onto Kirishima's shoulder. Debris! Zero murmured. A low, guttural growl echoed through the room. Both aspiring heroes looked up toward the ceiling. There, hanging in the shadows, a massive figure swayed slightly, its face seemingly directed at them. 3 seconds of absolute silence. Ah! Both screamed as one of the shadow's arms suddenly extended and struck Kirishima, launching him into the depths of the darkness. Kirishima! Zero shouted, stepping back while pointing his lamp at the creature. The shadow passed by Zero, ignoring him as it headed toward where Kirishima had flown. Oh no, you won't. Zero said, trying to muster courage as he fired tape from his elbows. He managed to partially entangle the creature and pulled with all his might. The shadow turned its head towards Zero with an almost confused expression before pulling strongly on the tape, causing him to stumble. Even so, Zero showed impressive agility. He dodged the shadow's long arms while continuing to fire tape, further limiting its movements. So annoying, complained the frustrated female voice of Rika. Sink into the darkness. Tokoyami's voice resonated from an unseen location. Sure thing, Fumi-ai. Rika replied playfully, suddenly disappearing into the ground and leaving the tape behind as if she'd never been caught. What the? Zero barely finished his question when he felt a strong tug that tore the lamp from his helmet. In the eerie darkness, Zero managed to make out a hand holding the lamp before it crushed it into pieces. In the oppressive blackness, 2 points of intense blue light appeared, glowing as they stared directly at him. A shiver ran down Zero's spine. Well, heroes. It seems you've managed to make it in, but the question is, will you manage to get out? Midoriya's voice sounded dry, almost uninterested, as the blue orbs drew closer slowly. Overwhelmed by panic, Zero began firing tape toward the glowing points, but they didn't stop moving. Meanwhile, Kirishima, disoriented and with a ringing in his ears, tried to get up. He had hardened his body at the last second, but the impact had still left him dazed. The sound of something dragging on the floor put him on alert. He hardened his entire body and braced himself just before taking another blow to the abdomen. This time, however, the hit only sent him back a few meters without knocking him down. This one's tough, Fumi-ai. Rika's voice moved around him, echoing in the darkness. Kirishima! Light. We need light. Zero shouted desperately, followed by the sound of a loud thud and a pained groan. Determined, Kirishima ran with all his strength toward what he hoped was the exterior wall. He yelled as he struck it repeatedly with all his energy. Finally, he managed to punch a large hole through which sunlight began to pour in. The room brightened considerably. However, Kirishima didn't have time to savor his success, as a sideways hit sent him flying to the other end of the room. Zero, relieved by the brief respite, turned to where Midoriya had been standing, only to find him now suspended in the air right in front of him. What? He shouted, but it was too late. Midoriya's fist smashed into Zero's helmet, partially shattering it and sending him flying toward the same spot where Kirishima had landed. Demenit! Zero exclaimed, pulling off the broken helmet painfully. Both heroes struggled to their feet, only to find themselves facing threats approaching slowly from opposite sides of the room. On one side, the enormous shadow laughing menacingly. On the other, Midoriya, advancing with his blue eyes fully revealed and a cold, expressionless face. Let's switch. Kirishima sprinted toward Izuku while Zero dodged Rika and resumed firing tape in an effort to contain her. This time, instead of vanishing, Rika began tearing through the tape, giving Zero valuable moments to react. Kirishima skidded as he was about to reach Midoriya, changing direction at the last second to dodge a blow from the white-haired boy. Got you, the redhead exclaimed as he propelled himself with all his strength, landing a powerful uppercut directly on Midoriya's chin. Kirishima landed after his leap and quickly turned his head to assess his opponent's condition. I hope I didn't overdo it, he thought, a bit worried. But what he saw was Midoriya, standing there completely unfazed. He hadn't even been shaken, nor did he show any signs of injury. The only difference was that his left hand was now making a gesture. What? But, my hit landed. Kirishima shouted, utterly bewildered. Is that what you think, hero? Why don't you come and check for yourself? Midoriya said, flashing a fake smile that didn't reach his eyes. Although he knew better than to take the bait, Kirishima felt an inexplicable need to go along with it. Without breaking eye contact with Izuku's glowing eyes, the redhead slowly approached until he was right in front of him. Midoriya tilted his head slightly and extended his open palm. Kirishima observed him for a moment before mimicking the gesture, reaching out to touch him. What? What is this? Kirishima yelled upon realizing he couldn't touch Midoriya. Surprised, Midoriya allowed the fake smile to fade. Suddenly, his hand moved, gripping Kirishima's fingers tightly and pulling him forcefully toward him. Huff! The air escaped Kirishima's lungs as a powerful punch to his chest sent him flying through the air. From the other end of the room, Shiro watched while dodging Rika's relentless attacks. Midoriya's strength is no joke, he thought, panting. Shiro knew he was at his limit. In a final attempt, he dodged one of Rika's swipes and positioned himself to shoot tape toward the bomb. All Might said we only need to touch the bomb, he thought as he watched his tape fly toward the target. But just as it was about to reach it, the tape veered sharply in midair, changing direction. What? Shiro thought, incredulous. That won't work, hero, Midoriya said, with an extended hand toward the tape, revealing that he had altered its trajectory. In it, Shiro muttered, spinning around just in time to see Rika approaching him slowly. Kirishima, we need to regrow, Shiro began to say, only to stop when he saw his teammate lying on the ground, with Tokoyami cuffing his wrists. Crap, I forgot about Tokoyami. This was a 3-on-2 from the start. The reality of the situation hit Shiro just as he turned back around, finding himself face to face with Midoriya. The white-haired boy was holding Shiro's damaged helmet in one hand. I suggest you surrender, hero. We wouldn't want things to get messy, Izuku said coldly, his irises gleaming with icy intent. He then squeezed the helmet with enough force to crush it completely. A shiver ran down Shiro's spine, and he lowered his gaze in defeat. I surrender. Dash, the villains win. All Might's booming voice announced through the earpieces. Shiro slowly raised his head, watching as Midoriya's cold expression shifted to one of warmth and friendliness. He even seemed to blush slightly. Crap, I think I went overboard. I'm so sorry, Shiro. I swear I didn't mean to destroy your helmet, I just wanted to crack it a little for dramatic effect. I got too into character. Are you okay? Midoriya rambled, apologizing rapidly. The tension left Shiro's body, and he let out a light laugh. Ha ha ha, no problem, man. Although, that was a total defeat. Don't sell yourselves short, you did really well. We got our butts kicked, no need to sugarcoat it, Kirishima said, walking over while rubbing his wrists, recently freed from the cuffs. Tokoyami followed behind him with a calm expression. I'm not joking. I mean it. It was a really tough setup for you guys. If we had swapped roles, it would have been much harder for us. The nature of our quirks was practically perfect for defending the bomb, Midoriya said, adjusting his dark glasses as he explained. Midoriya's right. You also managed to restrict Rika's movements inadvertently, limiting her usual freedom, added Tokoyami. Rika? Shiro asked. My quirk. The shadow. She has a mind of her own. Dude, that's awesome, but it scared the hell out of us, Shiro responded. Well, that was part of the strategy, Tokoyami commented with a faint smile. I just wish I could have done more. I spent most of the exercise being thrown around, Kirishima said, sounding disheartened. Hey, it's our first exercise. This doesn't define us as heroes at all. Besides, this is why we're here, isn't it? To improve, Midoriya said with a calm smile. Kirishima looked at him for a moment before breaking into a big grin and bumping fists with him. You're right, Midori bro. The next fight won't go the same way. Agreed. I definitely want a rematch later, Siro added, catching Kirishima's enthusiasm. I look forward to our next encounter, Tokoyami said solemnly. Midoriya smiled as he began pointing out areas for improvement for the two teens. Siro and Kirishima listened intently, feeling that his words were genuine and aimed at helping them. Tokoyami quietly joined in as well. The group, now more unified, made their way to the observation room to receive feedback from their teacher and watch the other matches. Unbeknownst to him, Izuku had earned not only the respect of the three people involved in the exercise, but perhaps a little fear as well. In the observation room, everyone had fallen into an eerie silence, frozen as they watched the teens enter. Ding! Kaminari muttered, breaking the stillness. Kaminari, that's not appropriate language for an aspiring hero. Iida scolded, flailing his arms. Come on, we're all thinking the same thing. That match was terrifying, Kaminari replied with a nervous laugh. He's right. I'm sorry to say it, but the heroes' team didn't stand a chance, Shoji said calmly. Tokoyami's quirk is amazing, but it's scary, Hagakure admitted, clearly nervous. Tokoyami's quirk? Forget that. Let's talk about Midoriya. Those piercing eyes when he took off his glasses sent shivers down my spine, and I wasn't even fighting him. Mina exclaimed, shrinking slightly. Snow can be terrifying when he sets his mind to it, Jer commented, crossing her arms as she averted her gaze toward the monitors. At that moment, the four teens from the last match entered the observation room. Hey, Izuku greeted, noticing how all eyes turned to him. Great job, both teams. Even though the villains won, you all did a fantastic job. All Might's voice boomed with enthusiasm, prompting relieved smiles from both teams. Yes, you were all wonderful, Uraraka added, radiating joy. The others began congratulating them on their performance, but a slight cough from All Might quickly regained their attention. Now then, as this was an initial, diagnostic exercise, there won't be an official grade. However, there is undoubtedly an MVP. Any guesses who it might be? The villains' team worked really well. Either one of them could be the MVP, Yaoyorozu said seriously, glancing at Tokoyami and Izuku, but I have a question. Why did you decide to stay put instead of setting traps around the building? That's true. And couldn't you have tried going after the heroes? Maybe splitting up, Karo, Tsuyu added, tilting her head in curiosity. Well, the simple reason is that we didn't know much about our opponent's quirks. Midoriya shrugged while Tokoyami nodded silently. Some students exchanged doubtful looks at Izuku's explanation. Let me elaborate. Midoriya swallowed nervously, noticing everyone's attention was now on him. We didn't know our opponent's abilities. For that reason, it wasn't a good idea to split up. While distracting the heroes could have been an option, fighting 2-on-1 without prior knowledge should always be a last resort since it's too risky. Maybe in the future, once we're more experienced and familiar with each other's abilities, we could try strategies like that. But for now, I didn't think it was feasible. Some began nodding, intrigued. Midoriya continued, gaining confidence. On the other hand, I approached it more practically. Instead of thinking of the bomb as, well, a bomb, I imagined it as a civilian we needed to protect from two villains trying to capture it. Using that logic, it wouldn't have been responsible to leave it unguarded. The best option was to decide where the confrontation would happen and adapt the area to our needs. The murmurs of approval grew as Midoriya kept explaining. Also, I don't want to sound arrogant, but my quirk has a trick that would literally make the bomb untouchable if they got too close. As villains, playing for time was the safest option to ensure victory. Winning by capture was just taking advantage of an opportunity, but we never lost sight of our real goal, not fighting or winning, but preventing them from reaching the bomb. Midoriya concluded. Shield nodded approvingly, while Yaoyorozu smiled with admiration. Farther back, All Might wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead. He thought it through more than I expected. All Might thought to himself. Young Midoriya is absolutely right. I loved that alternative way of viewing the exercise. But what truly makes him the MVP is that the situation was always under his control. While young Tokoyami did a splendid job, I've heard that much of the plan was devised by young Midoriya. Let me highlight something very important your classmate mentioned: never lose sight of your objective. That's completely true. Don't let your emotions or the desire to fight blind you. Keep your goal clear and unwavering. All Might concluded with a broad smile. The room broke into murmurs of agreement, several students glancing at Izuku with newfound respect. Now, let's move on to the next match. Team B as villains against Team E as heroes. All Might announced, bringing everyone's focus back to the training. As the next group prepared for their turn, Tokoyami glanced at Midoriya, who was heading to a seat with a clear view of all the observation monitors. With smooth movements, Izuku pulled a notebook seemingly out of nowhere and began scribbling notes at an impressive speed. Tokoyami couldn't help but notice Bakugo standing at the opposite end of the room, his intense gaze fixed on Midoriya. Though the white-haired boy appeared oblivious to it, Tokoyami knew there was something brewing behind Bakugo's glare. Rika was right, Tokoyami thought as he quietly sat next to Midoriya, observing the boy writing with complete focus. Faculty Lounge. All Might let out a heavy sigh as he reverted to his skeletal form, exhaling deeply in exhaustion. Tough day? Midnight asked, offering him a steaming cup of coffee with a warm smile. I never thought teaching could be this tiring. But it's also incredibly rewarding to know you're shaping the future of heroes. All Might accepted the cup gratefully, his smile sincere. That's the best part, but come on, spill it. Was there anything interesting? Any fights that got out of hand? Any troublemakers? Midnight pressed, her curiosity evident. Well, there wasn't anything too concerning, but if we're being picky, I suggest keeping an eye on Bakugo and Todoroki. Todoroki isn't using his fire side, that might need some follow-up. And Bakugo, he's aggressive, plus someone should review who approved those explosive gauntlets of his. That's extremely dangerous equipment. No first-year student should have support gear of that caliber, especially so early in the year. All Might sighed slightly before continuing, and speaking of costumes, Midnight, maybe you could give some advice to young Yaoyorozu. I understand the nature of her quirk, but I'm sure there are better alternatives. We should also get her a wrist-mounted computer. Carrying that book on her lower back is both dangerous and outdated. That makes sense. Midnight nodded thoughtfully. Additionally, we need to help young Hagakure. Her suit seems to turn invisible with her quirk, but for some reason, the boots and gloves don't. Isn't that a pretty big issue? Midnight raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Before she could respond, a tired voice interrupted from the corner of the room. Was there anything about Midoriya? Aizawa asked, lying in his yellow sleeping bag, watching them with one half-open eye. All Might turn toward him, surprised by the question. Young Midoriya? Not really. He performed very well, perhaps too well. Also, his eyes seemed to have something special. They allowed him to see in the dark. That's not in his file, is it? Something to keep an eye on. I'll check on it tomorrow. Curious. I honestly thought he might cause trouble. Aizawa momentarily closed his eyes, reflecting. Trust me, he's incredibly sharp. I'll send you all the recordings. You'll enjoy analyzing them, I assure you. His match was truly impressive, even if I do say so myself. All Might sipped his coffee, still amazed by the white-haired boy's performance. Suddenly, Midnight raised her voice from a corner of the room, where she was reviewing some files. Hey, I decided to start reviewing the details of Hagakure's costume, but all I found were the boots and gloves. All Might and Aizawa exchanged confused glances for a moment before the realization hit them both. Wait, are you saying she was naked? All Might began, horrified, but was cut off by Aizawa. I'll talk to her tomorrow. If you didn't notice, chances are no one else did either. I'll make sure it stays that way. Aizawa rose from his sleeping bag, looking tired but visibly irritated. In the meantime, you two report this to Nizu. He won't be happy about it. The company responsible for her costume will regret this negligence. Midnight nodded seriously, while All Might muttered something about ensuring the situation wouldn't negatively affect the young student. We returned to Izuku, walking slowly through UA's hallways, reviewing his notebook and smiling with excitement. Ha ha ha, I can't believe it. All my classmates are amazing. So many interesting quirks, so many applications, so many techniques. This just gives me new ideas, so many new ideas. Things I hadn't thought of before, applications for my quirk, and there's two. Who is the best? He murmured, sounding a bit eerie. After winning his match, Izuku had taken copious notes about his classmates. He was now confident that he had a considerable understanding of what they could do, though he hoped to ask more about their powers later. After all, the essence is in the details. Tomorrow's regular training. I'll make sure to have an action plan ready, and that'll give me a chance to chat with the others, especially Shield. That support gear on her costume partially eliminates her inability to use her quirk, which allowed her strategic mind to shine. If she can master that strange power, she'll definitely be someone to watch out for, he thought, smiling with excitement. Speaking of support gear. Izuku wasn't wandering aimlessly, he was heading toward the support course workshop he had seen on the first day of school. After knocking and waiting a few moments, a helmet shaped like a bulldozer appeared. It was Power Loader, the hero and creator of support gear. A first year? What do you need, kid? He asked. Good afternoon, Power Loader. I'm Izuku Midoriya from Hero Course 1A. I asked Professor All Might if I could request help with some support gear I'd like to use, and he said I could ask here. Oh sure. Although, isn't it a bit early to request modifications? Izuku decided to omit the fact that Zero would probably be here tomorrow to replace the helmet Izuku had broken, so he smiled nervously and replied, well, you know what they say, don't put off until tomorrow what you can do today. Haha. Power Loader looked at him oddly but then smiled faintly. Well, I suppose you're right. Come in and tell me what you need. Well, you see, because of my quirk, I have a partial mutation in my eyes. They're fundamental to using my power to its fullest, and I use these glasses to regulate my vision. The mutation is active all the time, which causes sensory overload. These glasses have been with me since I was 8, but the hospital couldn't afford to experiment with better materials. I was hoping UA could help me with that. I suppose you didn't include this in your costume request because you don't know what material would improve their functionality, right? Exactly. The glasses work fine, but my doctor has always insisted there might be a better material. That's why I want to upgrade them. When Izuku said the word, upgrade, Power Loader brought a hand to his forehead as if he knew what was coming next. Upgrade? Did you say upgrade? An energetic voice interrupted from behind Izuku. The white-haired boy turned to see a pink-haired girl in workshop attire, staring at him from just a few centimeters away, vibrating with excitement. Huh. Izuku muttered, slightly disoriented. If we're talking upgrades, then it's a job for me. I'll make you a baby that meets all your needs and things you didn't even know you needed. That's the Hatsume Incorporated guarantee, anticipating clients' needs, she said at a speed rivaling Izuku's. Baby? Izuku stammered, utterly confused. Power Loader sighed heavily. Hatsume, I've told you to speak slower and stop calling your inventions babies. Besides, Midoriya needs something straightforward. You always end up making things no one asks for. It's only the third day here, and all your assignments are things I didn't request, he said, exasperated. But they work, don't they? One should never settle for the minimum, Hatsume replied with a smile before turning to Izuku. So, what do you need? I need to upgrade my glasses. They help me with a condition caused by my quirk. Izuku started, but he couldn't finish. Hatsume had already taken his glasses to inspect them. Hatsume held the glasses up while getting uncomfortably close to Izuku, staring directly into his eyes. Both froze for a moment. Even Hatsume, who was usually all smiles, now had a slightly surprised expression. Pretty, Izuku murmured, staring into the girl's eyes. What? Hatsume stammered, her eyes widening further. Izuku felt his face heat up. I know, your eyes are interesting. Yes, interesting. I suppose it's because of your quirk, right? What does it allow you to do? Mine help me. Well, I mean, all eyes are for seeing, but mine allow me to see energy that I control. Izuku stumbled over his words, nervously rambling. Power Loader broke the moment, clearly entertained by the awkward exchange. Hatsume, what the boy needs is a pair of enhanced glasses to manage his special vision. Hatsume shook her head, snapping out of it, and her usual energetic demeanor returned with full force. Then you've come to the right place. Give me the details. Izuku glanced at Power Loader, who gave him a slight nod. The boy started explaining while Hatsume listened intently. Well, my current glasses are made of carbon and silicon. Anyone besides me wouldn't be able to see through them, but they help me limit my vision because my ocular mutation can't be turned off. My eyes, in short, allow me to see in energy I control. I can also see in 360 degrees across 2 planes with no blind spots, and if I concentrate, I can expand that 360-degree bubble to gain more range. As Izuku spoke, Hatsume pulled out a strange crown-like device with electrodes and, without warning, placed it on his white hair. So your glasses primarily prevent sensory overload, huh? Hatsume commented, not even looking at him as she analyzed data on a screen. Why yes. Izuku responded, even more confused by what was happening. Your brainwaves definitely show you're processing a lot of information. I'm guessing the glasses help, but they also obstruct your ability to fully see the energy you mentioned. I bet you train your movements without them and rely on muscle memory, right? Izuku nodded, impressed by her analytical skills. Do they need to be glasses to protect your eyes, or could it be something else? Hatsume asked, turning toward him with her arms crossed and a curious look. Well, I don't really need additional protection. My quirk handles that. But something other than glasses. Izuku replied as he put his glasses back on. Hatsume grinned widely, of course. That opens up a ton of possibilities. If it doesn't have to be rigid materials for lenses, the range of materials we can experiment with expands a lot. She quickly started jotting down notes in a notebook while mumbling to herself. Then, with a decisive expression, she looked up. All right, that's enough for now. Come back tomorrow to pick up the Mark 1. Izuku blinked in disbelief. Tomorrow? That's fast, don't you need to run more tests? This data is enough for the first prototype. The brain scans I just did tell me everything I need. After all, we don't need to see what you see, just understand how your brain reacts when you do. From there, I can create something that acts as an adjustable control. That way, you can regulate how much capacity you use and avoid being at 100% all the time. Tomorrow, we'll run more tests with the Mark 1 to fine-tune it. Also, speed is the Hatsume Incorporated trademark, she declared with a manic grin. I thought your trademark was delivering things the clients didn't know they needed, Izuku muttered. Hatsume Incorporated has several trademarks, all right? She replied with a mock pout that was oddly endearing. Izuku raised his hands in a conciliatory gesture, nodding quickly with a nervous laugh. Well, what are you waiting for? Out of the workshop. I need space to work, the girl ordered, pointing to the door. Thank you very much, Hatsume. I'll come by tomorrow then, Izuku said, offering a grateful smile as he left. Power Loader, who had been watching everything, sighed. That'll keep her occupied for a while, he thought as he went to oversee other students. Unnoticed, Hatsume's eyes lingered on the door where Izuku had left, his white hair the last thing she saw. Pretty, huh? She whispered to herself with a faint smile before diving back into her work. End of chapter. Izuku's notes. Name, Fumikage Tokoyami. Quirk, Dark Shadow, Rika, Sentient. Danger level, 1st grade, still uncertain. Notes. He's the first person I've seen using the same energy as me, but in a completely different way. Rika seems to be composed entirely of that energy. I wonder, would I be able to control Rika? Logic would suggest yes, but something in my gut says no, as if she's an exclusive technique of Tokoyami, just like infinity and attraction are exclusive to me. Still, I think Tokoyami and Rika could harness their power in ways they haven't imagined yet. After all, Tokoyami shares another similarity with me. He doesn't have any channels or conduits in his body either. Could he reinforce and enhance his physical capabilities like I do? Many questions, few answers. Tomorrow is general training. 2 hours of exercises with Aizawa and 1 hour of free training. I'll ask Tokoyami if he's interested in hearing some ideas. On another note, after watching today's matches, I thought of a couple of new applications for my quirk that hadn't occurred to me before. They should be relatively easy to achieve, as they aren't entirely new concepts, just different implementations. End of notes.